everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Fate Ascend. Synopsis. This is a fan translation of. The original author is. Art is by @kilometer_mechi. Edit is by Clay TL. Please support them. I transmigrated into the NASAverse and gained recognition from the root itself. As long as I can manage an unnatural death, I'll ascend to the throne of heroes, becoming its master, stronger and freer than any of the 7 grand servants. So, I started courting death all across the NASAverse. I openly insulted the king of heroes to his face, challenged the almighty Zeus in Greece, abducted Skachik in broad daylight in the Norse realm, declared in Israel that Solomon was a demon god rather than the son of God, and in Britain, I went so far as to publicly side with Morgan. But tell me, why am I still alive? Fuyuki, 1994. A man of many names, the third companion of the oldest king, the first vizier of Mesopotamia, the favored of the Greek gods, king of the giants in the Norselands, the divine incarnation who awakened Solomon's humanity in Israel, the prince's right hand in Camelot. Rovi, whose face was young but whose eyes carried the weight of ages, sat atop the Fuyuki bridge. With a weary sigh, he looked at the people before him. So, where do you think it all went wrong? He lowered his voice, half pleading, half desperate. How about, you kill me? Just let me ascend to the throne, please, I'm begging you. Emir Kiritsugu lit a cigarette, glancing at Artoria beside him, who'd raised Rongominiad, at Gilgamesh, whose gate of Babylon shimmered ominously behind him, at the blood-red spearhead emerging from the shadows of the land of shadows. The hand holding his cigarette trembled, just a little. Discord.gg/wisetl. Chapter 1-30, Fate Ascend 1. Night had fallen, and the sky was draped in a tapestry of stars, each one glittering like an unblinking eye, gazing down on the towering city-state of Uruk. At the same time, in the heart of the city, within a side chamber of the temple dedicated solely to the gods. By the flickering light of the brazier, Rovi, who looked like a black-haired, black-eyed youth, was carefully holding a smooth clay tablet meant for recording notes. With painstaking precision, he carved characters into it with a small knife. Rovi, thank you for the trouble of carving out the prayer for tomorrow's ritual. Beside him, an old man spoke in a raspy, deep voice aged as the man himself. I'm getting on in years. My eyes are failing me. Soon, the role of high priest will be yours to bear. It sounded, on the surface, like the kind of empty promise a superior would make to keep someone motivated. But Rovi knew the old man was speaking the truth. He really was old now, and his body was no longer fit to carry the heavy burden of Uruk's most important priesthood for much longer. And as one of the few young people in the temple, able to read and write, and with every god's name and title committed to memory, Rovi really was the only candidate to succeed him. If not, the old priest would never have entrusted him with something as crucial as carving the text for tomorrow's great ritual, especially after only a handful of encounters. In the year since he'd transmigrated here, Rovi had demonstrated plenty of talent, but because of his lack of seniority, he was hardly the most outstanding among all the assistants and acolytes. This kind of responsibility should never have fallen to him. It was a clear signal. So, hearing the old man's words, Rovi immediately looked up and replied, meeting the other's gaze. You can rest assured. This is what I'm supposed to do. Such a fine young man, the old priest sighed, then staggered to his feet. Beneath the linen robes unique to his rank, his body was nothing but skin and bones, swaying unsteadily. His beard and hair trembled as he moved. You keep at it. I won't disturb you anymore. Get some rest, the festival will need you to stand in for me tomorrow. If only the king could be as steady as you. He muttered regretfully as he made his way to the door, the words filled with a mixture of longing and resignation. But even he knew it was impossible. Everyone in this country knew what kind of person ruled Uruk these days, Gilgamesh, the current king, wild and unrestrained, arrogant and willful. He didn't just speak his mind to his own people, even facing the gods themselves, he dared to voice his disdain and dissatisfaction without a hint of fear. Of course, the old priest's sense of comfort and resignation came from age and failing sight. He couldn't make out what Rovi was actually carving into the clay tablet, he had no idea what this young man was truly planning. What Rovi was writing was not a prayer for the gods. It was a petition, advice to the king, written in the voice of a loyal subject. And every word was steeped in his regret for Uruk, his sympathy for its people, and his unvarnished condemnation of Gilgamesh, that young and tyrannical king, not quite disrespectful, but definitely not polite. Rovi had no desire to take part in rituals to appease the gods. What he really wanted was to curse out that so-called king, who strutted around all day looking down on everyone. If I do this, my name should at least make it into the annals of humanity. Then, if I die, it counts, right? Guilt gnawed at him for deceiving the old priest, but once he'd seen the old man safely out of the room, Rovi turned back to the stone tablet by the fire. Reading over what he'd carved, he couldn't help but let out a low chuckle. He wasn't doing this for the sake of the country or the people. As a transmigrator, he hadn't even been here long enough to develop that kind of attachment. The truth was, he just wanted to die. Yes. This was a city-state on the Mesopotamian plains. But Rovi, who'd already laid eyes on the golden-haired, dazzlingly beautiful god-king Gilgamesh, knew that this was not the Uruk from the history books, but the Uruk of the Nasiverse. In this world, everything originates from the root, and all things return to the root. The root is both the beginning and the end. To enter or leave this world, one must pass through the root. So when he transmigrated here, it was only natural that he'd crossed the root as well. But he hadn't just passed through. His consciousness had been scattered and confused by the turbulence of space-time, but in the root, he'd glimpsed countless things. The root is both everything and nothing. While there, one could touch the essence of all knowledge. So, even in his muddled state, Rovi understood, this was the Nasiverse. And he saw, on the other side of the root, the path he was about to take into this world, something grand and mysterious, the throne. A sliver of the record tape that held all phenomena, the throne of heroes. Inscribed on the throne were all the heroes of human history, from ancient times to the present, from every parallel world that had branched from human progress. Their legends were all recorded there. As he was about to leave the root and plunge into the Nasiverse, Rovi, briefly near omniscient and omnipotent, knew full well he could not bring the root's power with him. His new mortal body could never withstand that immense force and knowledge. So, he left it behind. He carved all his power and knowledge into the throne of heroes as he passed. And at the very summit of the throne, he carved out a seat, a place at the pinnacle of human history, a seat that only he could claim. That was his cheat as a transmigrator, a golden finger to call his own. It's a shame about all that power, but as long as I can make a name for myself in human history, and then die just not by my own hand, I can get recognized by the throne, and make it back there. Claim that seat, and take back everything that's rightfully mine. With that kind of power, the throne could no longer bind him, it would become his domain. That's why he was writing this petition, deliberately, methodically, risking everything just for this one shot at dying a famous, spectacular death. As the first person in history to curse out a tyrant king as a subject, Rovi was sure he'd be remembered by human history. Once he died, the throne would be his. It was only logical. But he needed to be careful. He couldn't let anyone find out. After all, in this world, the counterforce, the will of the world itself, was always watching. If they caught on, it might become impossible for him to die the way he needed. And to make sure that he was the one who made it to the throne, not some pretender or an invented legend, Rovi had to die at the height of his infamy, right after sealing his legacy. But he couldn't take his own life. So, with all these requirements in mind, Rovi forced himself to check his work again. I need to make sure I cursed him thoroughly enough. I have to get that king so furious he loses all control. Can't let anything slip through the cracks. With that in mind, Rovi picked up his knife and sat down by the fire, painstakingly checking every word he'd carved. Time passed. Outside the window, the darkness began to give way, a faint light creeping over the horizon. Dawn was breaking. The once quiet city of Uruk began to stir, shadows moving between its mud-brick streets. Rovi swayed a little, shaken from his intense focus on the tablet by a push from behind. Rovi, priest. A young attendant from the temple called him, voice respectful. The old priest is asking for you at the Pantheon. The ceremony is about to start. Only then did Rovi realize that daylight had already come. I understand. Clutching the tablet tightly in both hands, Rovi nodded. I'll be right there. TN. I'm pretty sure I've read this fic before, but I think it was MTL'd. Chapter 2, Fate Ascend 2. 1252 words. The temple complex of Uruk was a sprawling labyrinth. Unlike the world Rovi had come from, the era he now found himself in was one where the gods truly existed, where myth was reality. And because of that, the people's faith in the gods wasn't just a primitive or of nature, but a deep expression of loyalty, fear, and dependence upon divine beings. Every king of Uruk, generation after generation, would restore and expand the temple, building upon what their predecessors had left behind. For people of this era, it was only natural to believe that humanity lived under the rule and protection of the gods. Even someone as dismissive of the gods as Gilgamesh couldn't truly change that. Otherwise, there would be no point in holding a festival to honor the gods at all. The annual collective ritual for the gods was, to say the least, a grand affair. But for now, all of this was only background noise to Rovi. Once he'd received word from the high priest, brought to him by one of the temple's attendants, he immediately took his clay tablet and left his chamber, making his way through the maze of steps and corridors. It took some time before he finally reached the heart of the temple complex, where the ritual was to be held. The Pantheon. The main hall dedicated to the gods. Built of enormous, seamless blocks of natural stone, its towering columns stood like the primordial pillars that the god Ea had carved from the earth to uphold the world. The statues of countless gods lined the four walls. In the very center, occupying the core position, stood the sky god Anu, king of the gods. In front of Anu's image, the old priest, draped in his linen robes, saw Rovi entering through the side door and couldn't help but nod approvingly. Rovi, you've worked hard. He repeated himself, looking both proud and pleased at Rovi's prompt arrival. This is my duty, Rovi replied with a gentle smile, glancing around. All the other priests were already in their places, each seated with solemn dignity before the statue of their respective patron deity. This seating arrangement was tradition for the annual festival. Standing before the king of the gods statue, the high priest naturally presided over Anu's rites, but more than that, he was also the host for the entire festival. Except, this year, he was not the one to preside. That role belonged to Rovi, the successor personally chosen by the old priest. Everyone, I'll be counting on you. The old man addressed the assembled priests, his tone sincere. It's Rovi's first time leading a ritual of this scale. I hope you'll all support him. Don't worry, High Priest. We'll cooperate with Rovi in every way, the priests replied. Having dedicated their lives to serving the gods, these priests were no longer young. Toward Rovi, they felt only kindness and perhaps a bit of envy for the high priest, who had found such a worthy successor. But now was not the time for idle talk, so no one said much more. The king is coming, someone called out from beyond the doors. At once, the priests fell silent, their expressions growing solemn. The high priest quietly stepped aside, leaving the spot before Anu's image to Rovi. From the openwork dome above, light poured down, golden, shimmering with the dawn. Rovi stood tall. He had already changed into his ritual linen robes on the way here. Holding his clay tablet in both hands, he gazed at the open doorway, his expression grave and unmoving, perhaps even a bit tense. To those watching, it was only natural. After all, though this wasn't Rovi's first ritual, it was his first time leading one of such importance. Anyone would be nervous. But the truth was, Rovi's nerves had nothing to do with the ritual itself. All I'm thinking about is how to provoke the incoming king, how to push Gilgamesh's rage to the limit and fulfill my own goal. At that moment, noise echoed outside the temple doors. A muffled thud. First, a procession of servants entered, already prepared and moving in order. Then came the soft roll of carpets made from fine wool, unfurled across the floor. Treasures were laid out, rare and precious offerings placed before the statues of the gods. And then, finally, the main event. Gilgamesh made his entrance. TCH. So this is the so-called Festival of the Gods. Such extravagance, all for a bunch of worthless voyeurs who only dare peek down from the heavens. Wasting my treasures on them, nothing could infuriate me more. The familiar voice of Uruk's king echoed through the temple. It seemed that, even here, in such a setting, he couldn't be bothered to restrain himself. Standing beside Rovi, the high priest, reduced to the role of a mere attendant, could only sigh silently, placing all hope for Uruk's continued relationship with the gods on Rovi's shoulders. Honestly, it's a wonder anyone would call this a civilized solution. Rovi himself hadn't exactly shown great reverence for the gods, either. But compared to Gilgamesh, Rovi was practically a saint. For the first time, the old priest realized why he had such faith in Rovi. Rovi, meanwhile, wasn't thinking about any of this. He simply passed by the rare treasures that had just been presented, eyes fixed on the doorway. A tall figure entered, surrounded by servants. Just as Rovi remembered, Gilgamesh's short hair shone like gold, his sculpted features could have been chiseled by the gods, and his crimson eyes, pupils slit like a serpent's, glimmered with an inhuman brilliance. Draped in a skirt-like garment typical of the era, his upper body bare, skin crisscrossed with glowing red circuits, his muscles hard as stone, shining with a godlike radiance. His cruelty was infamous throughout Uruk. And yet, none could deny Gilgamesh had the bearing of a king. He strode forward, surrounded by his attendants, making his way toward the statues of the gods without the slightest pretense of respect. If anything, he seemed more interested in Rovi, who now stood before the image of Enlil, king of the gods. So, the high priest has been replaced this year? Chimph, fine. Better you than that old relic, let's hope you can at least put on an interesting show for me, mongrel. Gilgamesh's arrogance was as blatant as ever. Normally, anyone in Rovi's position would respond with silence, doing their best to avoid the king's unpredictable temper. That was what most people in Uruk would have done. But Rovi, desperate for death, was no ordinary man. Though it wasn't yet time to hand over his clay tablet, Rovi knew this was the perfect moment to make an impression. Raging fury wasn't something you could provoke all at once, it needed to build. I should leave him with a good, strong first impression. Now was the time. Believe me, Your Majesty. You'll enjoy it, Rovi replied with a smile, his voice echoing through the temple, calm on the surface, but edged with unmistakable mockery. Mongrel, did I give you permission to speak? Gilgamesh's crimson eyes narrowed, and he let out a cold laugh. The assembled priests, servants, and guards all froze. No one had expected Rovi to respond to Gilgamesh's casual taunt. If the king lost his temper now, the consequences could be disastrous. And yet, against all expectations, Uruk's king merely smirked, showing no real sign of outrage. This young priest was more interesting than he'd expected. If anything, Gilgamesh seemed to be hoping that this festival would go awry. Chapter 3, Fate Ascend 3. 1,204 words. Rovi was honestly a bit puzzled by how calm the king of Uruk remained. Even though he'd watched the Nassaverse series before transmigrating and thought he had a sense of Gilgamesh's character, there was simply no way to truly grasp the patterns of this king's emotions. Or maybe there were no patterns to begin with. Gilgamesh, the epitome of self-indulgence, fit the phrase capricious and unpredictable perfectly. Unable to make sense of it, Rovi decided not to dwell on it. If anything, it just solidified his determination to ascend to the throne of heroes and reclaim his power. With that kind of power, there's no way Gilgamesh could hide his thoughts from me. Turning his attention back to the present, facing Gilgamesh's cold sneer and pointed question, Rovi only smiled, choosing not to push further. Know when to pull back. Provoking things any further wouldn't be enough to secure his place in history, and if Gilgamesh flew into a real rage now, Rovi's death would be wasted. This was a hard-won opportunity, one that could earn him both lasting fame and a glorious death. He couldn't afford to throw it away. He was confident that, at the very least, his antics had already left a negative enough impression in Gilgamesh's mind. That was enough for now. Chimph, gone quiet already? Is that all there is to you, mongrel? Gilgamesh actually seemed disappointed. Fine then. Just grovel in the radiance of my greatness. Let that dazzling light illuminate every filthy inch of your worm-like existence. Seriously, how does he say stuff like that without feeling a hint of shame? Rovi worked hard to keep his face expressionless. Gilgamesh shook his head, thoroughly unimpressed. He'd expected something entertaining, but it seemed that was all there was. "My king, it's time," a servant at his side reminded him quietly. The moment for the collective ritual honoring all the gods had arrived. Rovi glanced up at the sky, high noon. They said that at this hour, the gods themselves ascended to the highest point in the Mesopotamian heavens with the blazing sun. It was the most sacred time, the moment when the gods could most keenly feel the devotion of humanity. Time for the lead priest, Rovi himself, to step forward. "O great and honored gods above." Taking up the role of master of ceremonies, Rovi intoned with a clear, ceremonial voice, stringing together flowery praise. "We, the people of Uruk, offer our sincerest gratitude and prayers here today." The old high priest, listening as he watched Gilgamesh lounge in open disdain against a stone pillar, felt moved to tears. The contrast between people really is something. Rovi, for all his talents, wasn't quite as powerful or wise as Gilgamesh, but he was recognized as the second most gifted among Uruk's younger generation. The gap wasn't insurmountable. And with at least a basic respectfulness in his attitude, however lacking in true piety, it was a world of difference. For a while now, the old priest had feared that Gilgamesh's wildness would see Uruk abandoned and destroyed by the gods. Now, watching Rovi, he felt hope for the city's future stir again. But that hope was short-lived. As soon as Rovi finished his impressive introduction, the priests before each of their god statues began their ceremonial dance. Flames were kindled among the offerings, incense smoke drifting up toward the heavens. And now, the real highlight, it was time for Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, to recite the ritual text. No matter what else, as the city's ruler, he was the true focus of the festival. In this ancient city-state, where government and religion were one, the king was the highest priest, the god's own emissary. Compared to him, the high priest and all the other clergy were mere attendants. The clay tablet Rovi had created and inscribed by hand was meant for just this moment. He would hand it over to Gilgamesh and turn this entire festival into a death-defying act for the ages, a petition that would go down in history as the boldest remonstrance ever made. "My king, please read the ritual text," Rovi said, flicking the sleeve of his linen robe and presenting the tablet to the golden-haired youth still leaning on his pillar. Gilgamesh accepted it, not without reluctance. "You actually dare to have this exalted king recite such nauseating drivel for the sake of those worthless mongrels? On any other day, such disrespect would mean death for all of you." Even so, he still wouldn't let anyone get the last word. In truth, Gilgamesh's blatant contempt for the gods wasn't because of any real reverence. He was here for only one reason: his mother, one of the gods herself, daughter of Anu the Sky King, the omniscient goddess Ninsun. This king so famous in later eras was born of both king and goddess, a true demigod. Human in blood, divine in wisdom and strength. That was a bond he could never truly break, one slender thread that still connected the rebellious king to the heavens above. But it was a tenuous tie at best. Now, when the gods could no longer descend to the world in person, and Gilgamesh hadn't seen his mother in ages, even that last thread seemed ready to snap. For now, though, it was enough to keep him here. Gilgamesh took the clay tablet from Rovi's hands with visible disdain. The tablet that required Rovi's full effort to hold was featherlight in the king's grip. Standing beneath the shafts of sunlight from above, the king's crimson eyes flicked over the carved script. He began to read aloud. The gods gazed down from their heavenly temple, wielding dominion over sky and earth. At first, everything seemed normal. But only at first. The gods chose a king to rule over mankind, believing their choice perfect. But how has that king acted? The so-called king is cruel, harsh. He oppresses his people, treating Uruk as his own private domain, tolerating no dissent. He thinks himself great, but he doesn't see that the people only fear his strength and authority. Gilgamesh's brow furrowed, something was wrong. His voice grew quieter. But he finished reading, almost involuntarily. The king tramples others as he pleases, calls all his subjects mongrels, treats everyone as a slave. But by his own logic, a king who is half god, half man, he is the greatest mongrel of all. Crack. The tablet in Gilgamesh's hand split, deep fractures spiderwebbing beneath his fingers as he clenched it tight. Though his voice had dropped to a murmur by the end, the last words still reached every ear in the temple. For a heartbeat, the entire hall was silent. Priests, servants, everyone exchanged terrified glances. Except for Rovi, who was beaming with satisfaction. He was genuinely proud of his ritual text. As a transmigrator, Rovi knew that in later generations of China, there would be a legendary official who once submitted a fearless memorial to the emperor, speaking the truth about his failings. That man was Rovi Seidel. Rovi could never match him in eloquence. But for Rovi, what he'd written here was enough. Especially that last line. You go around calling everyone a mongrel. But who's really the mongrel here? I've been holding that in for a long time. Chapter 4, Fate Ascend 4. 1,105 words. This was a twist that no one except Rovi, who'd planned it all, could have seen coming. Though the sudden upheaval had plunged the temple into silence, everyone could feel it. The king's fury was rising. It was only natural. Since Gilgamesh became king, or rather, since the day he was born, no one had ever dared rebuke him to his face, let alone insult him so brazenly. Not even his own parents, the previous king and the all-knowing goddess, had ever treated him this way. My king, this was an accident. The old high priest stepped forward, his body trembling. His mind had gone blank, he couldn't fathom why the usually respectful Rovi would do such a thing, but as high priest, it was still his duty to calm the king's wrath. Or maybe it was really a mistake, maybe Rovi had grabbed the wrong tablet by accident. Even now, he was still looking for excuses for Rovi. But Gilgamesh merely glanced at him, those crimson, snake-like eyes as cold as the ice at the bottom of the underworld. That chill alone rendered the old man speechless. Did I give you permission to speak, Mong? It was his usual insult, but as the words from the tablet echoed in his mind, Gilgamesh actually faltered. His face grew even darker. But the effect was undeniable. Under that blood-red gaze, no one dared say a word. In an instant, all the priests, servants, and guards fell to their knees. Gilgamesh was a king of both god and man, his wrath brought a crushing pressure that made everyone tremble instinctively. Everyone except Rovi, after all, Rovi had come from the root itself. Even if his power was now sealed in the throne of heroes, he'd once held it. Gilgamesh's intimidation didn't even register. Inside, Rovi was positively delighted. The angrier Gilgamesh got, the happier he felt. And on his face, that smug, mocking smile only grew. Gilgamesh's eyes grew colder still. Mongrel. Do you understand what it means to enrage a king as great and radiant as I? Wretched worm. His voice was glacial, surrounded on all sides by his prostrate subjects. The red circuit marks on his body began to glow brilliantly. That was the power of the gods awakening. A power vast and overwhelming, an inheritance of divinity far beyond mortal strength. Who among us isn't lowly? Rovi answered, undaunted by the mounting fury. In fact, he seemed almost pleased. Greatness is always relative, and humility is forever. Maybe I'm weaker than you, but compared to the gods, and the gods compared to the cosmos, who can claim true strength forever? At least, I can see that for what it is. You, on the other hand. O mighty king, Rovi's smile blazed, dazzling to the point of provocation. Do you only know how to turn your weapons on your own people? Do you only use your kingly authority and strength to crush those who serve you? Rovi had rehearsed his words well, he would never be lost for words at a moment like this. His tone rang out, unshaken. Do you know what it means to be king? A true king is one who protects his people, one who safeguards his land. And you? What have you done? You call yourself king, but all you do is oppress your subjects, abuse the powerless, judge the world by your whims, trample on the dignity of those under your rule, caring nothing for wealth or poverty, fortune or misfortune. You treat the nation as your private property, play with your people as if they were toys, disposing of them at a whim. Are you really worthy of the crown? Gilgamesh, you really are just a mongrel yourself. Rovi's words rang out, impassioned. His handsome face was flushed with genuine fervor. Gilgamesh's expression shifted from icy to eerily calm. To call the king by name was high treason in Uruk. Yet Gilgamesh did not fly into a rage, nor did he curse back. If anything, he grew coldly quiet. Everyone knew, this was the real warning sign. This was when Gilgamesh was truly angry. He had always reserved the word mongrel for others. And now, someone had thrown it back at him. Yet somehow, Rovi's words struck a chord with the crowd kneeling around them. For all of Gilgamesh's arrogance, he was, as Rovi described, cruel, domineering, unpredictable, sneering at those above, oppressing those below, leaving the people of Uruk to suffer. Everyone knew it. But until now, no one had ever dared to confront Gilgamesh directly. No one had ever rebuked him to his face. Except Rovi. Right here, right now, it was Rovi. He was speaking out with his life on the line, standing up for Uruk's people, naming the king's failings with his last breath. The crowd realized it all at once. The old high priest burst into tears. He'd chosen the right man. Compared to himself, who only cared about prolonging Uruk's survival, Rovi was bold and direct, more passionate for this country than anyone. Are you finished? Gilgamesh's words cut through the silence, his tone icy and hard as iron. Only the red divine circuits on his body continued to blaze, brighter than ever. For daring to enrage the king, Rovi now faced the heaviest punishment. But while most people would cower, Rovi was hoping for exactly that. If anything, he worried the punishment might not be harsh enough. He needed to die, after all. So he threw more fuel on the fire. Finished? Of course not. Gilgamesh, do you think that just because the heavens chose you as king, you can do as you please? That you can use your demigod strength to oppress the weak? No. You can't. No one can. Uruk was built by human hands. We raised these walls from the dust and mud, stone by stone. This is our home, our kingdom. Our king should be chosen by the people. You are not worthy. Crack. 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 At that moment, the clay tablet in Gilgamesh's grasp finally shattered completely, splintering into pieces and scattering across the temple floor. Rovi felt a pang of regret. He'd wanted to keep a physical record of this moment. But it was enough. As the first death-defying petition in human history, Rovi was sure his name would be remembered. And now, I may be alone, and you can kill me if you wish. But I believe, once I'm gone, the people will not remain silent. In the future, there will surely be those who rise up against your cruelty. Rovi would let these words stand, his final declaration, to be echoed through the ages. He'd make sure his death was truly spectacular. Chapter 5, Fate Ascend 5. 1,166 words. His final words fell, clear and resounding. That was enough. Rovi closed his eyes, ready to meet death. He was certain there was no way he'd survive this. After all, this kind of humiliation would be intolerable to any king. Let alone Gilgamesh. Yet Gilgamesh stood frozen, his eyes flickering with more than just anger. There was a hint of something contemplative. Without a doubt, he had just been consumed by a wave of extreme fury. As a king who held himself above all others, this was unprecedented. No one had ever dared insult him to his face, let alone in such a direct, confrontational way. Even if such insults couldn't shake Gilgamesh's core, they'd brought him incomparable humiliation. Especially that word, mongrel, thrown back in his face. And yet, the king should be chosen by the people. That single phrase, shouted in Rovi's righteous indignation, gave Gilgamesh pause at the height of his rage. Gilgamesh utterly despised the gods. He bore divine blood, he was chosen by the gods to be the king of men, the wedge between heaven and earth, meant to sustain the bond between mortals and gods. When he was young, Gilgamesh may not have understood what that meant. But as he grew older, he came to resent the gods' constant attempts to control him. He refused to be bound, to be a puppet whose fate was set in stone. That was why he acted with such reckless abandon, refusing to become the wise king the gods expected, choosing instead to rule as a tyrant. At its root, all of it came from his deep hatred for the gods. But for that very reason, he found himself agreeing with Rovi's words. He should be king of mankind. He should be chosen by the people. Not a puppet handpicked by the gods. This guy. Maybe he's like me, disgusted by those high and mighty gods, unwilling to submit. He's standing here, speaking to me not as a servant of the gods, but as a representative of humanity. Gilgamesh looked down at Rovi, who now stood before him, eyes closed, awaiting death. The temple remained utterly still, everyone knelt in silence. But Gilgamesh could see clearly, thanks to this young priest's words, a restlessness was stirring among the people. The other priests, especially the high priest, they all wanted to save Rovi for speaking out as he did. Because he had dared, for the people's sake, to speak the truth. It was what they had all wished for, but never dared to say. Interesting. Gilgamesh let out a laugh. Rovi, still standing there with his eyes shut, started to feel confused when death didn't arrive as quickly as expected. He opened his eyes, bewildered, and met Gilgamesh's upturned lips, and the serpentine reflection shining in those crimson eyes. No longer cold, instead, they now held open appreciation. Though your barking is as grating and irritating as a wild dog's in the countryside, and your words as disgusting as a bug gnawing at the dirt, the loyalty you've shown, braced for death as you were, has truly reached my heart. His words were as harsh as ever, but the recognition in his tone was impossible to miss. The priests all breathed a sigh of relief. Only Rovi stood there, utterly lost. What just happened? Who am I? Where is this? Wait a second. Weren't you supposed to kill me? As a selfish tyrant, how are you just letting this go? This isn't in your character setting at all. But no matter how confused Rovi was, no matter how he screamed inside, none of it made any difference. I recognize your loyalty and pardon your offense against my noble and glorious self, Gilgamesh said with a wave of his hand, turning away. Go home and weep in gratitude for my mercy. This matter ends here. I'm tired. I'll be returning to rest. With that, Gilgamesh strode toward the great doors. Any other day, if the king walked out before the ritual ended, people would rush to stop him. Even his divine mother would sometimes send down an oracle through the priests. But today, whether mortal or divine, everyone was still reeling from what had just happened. No one stopped Gilgamesh as he left. No need to recite any more nauseating prayers, no need to stand around while his treasures were wasted on the sky's parasites. All in all, Gilgamesh found himself in a surprisingly good mood. The anger from earlier was already gone. As a matter of fact, he should remember to reward that priest properly when he got home. Gilgamesh departed in high spirits, leaving behind a thoroughly stunned Rovi, and a roomful of priests who could finally breathe easy. Thank goodness. The king truly is wise, Rovi. He understood your intentions. An elderly priest shuffled over to him. Not a single one of them blamed Rovi for interrupting the ritual. If anything, they were relieved he'd survived. Rovi, if you planned to do something like this, why didn't you tell us in advance? Another priest asked. The high priest added, if we'd all spoken up together, it would have been better than you facing it alone. Truthfully, Rovi was a little touched. He knew these elders genuinely cared for him, but at the same time, he felt both amused and exasperated. What intentions? I just wanted to die. It was now clear his plan to provoke Gilgamesh into killing him had completely failed. Rovi let out a long sigh. Little Rovi, why do you look so glum? Seeing his gloomy face, one of the priests couldn't help but ask, are you worried the gods will punish you for interrupting the ceremony? At that, Rovi's eyes suddenly lit up. This world really did have gods. If the gods were angered because he'd disrupted their festival and denied them Uruk's offerings, he might still have a shot at dying. As the others fretted, Rovi felt a new surge of hope. Just then, someone shouted, look, it's a sign from the gods. Everyone looked up to see a shaft of light streaming down from the open dome above Anu's statue. It was the radiance of the gods. The gods could no longer descend in person, but they could still send down their will. Rovi was delighted. To him, this was surely a message demanding his death. The gods of Mesopotamia were infamous for their pettiness. But his smile faded almost instantly. Priest Rovi, you have pointed out the king's mistakes to set him back on the right path. The gods have seen your loyalty and courage. Though you showed disrespect for the festival, your fearless heart has earned the gods' praise. The gods forgive your irreverence and proclaim, from now on, all your actions among mortals shall be permitted by the gods. The priests broke into cheers, singing the wisdom of their king and the generosity of the gods. Only Rovi stood there, utterly dumbfounded. He just wanted to say, why? All he wanted was to die. Why was it so damn difficult? Chapter 6, Fate Ascend 6. 1164 words. That's right, Rovi suddenly remembered. Gilgamesh's wisdom was exactly what the gods had always wanted. As a demigod, Gilgamesh had always been the gods' representative among mortals. The wiser he became, the more proof it offered that the gods, even if unable to descend to the world in person, could still shelter humanity from above. As long as that persisted, the faith left behind by the gods would remain unshaken, no matter how many years passed. That was the very point of the so-called wedge. From the gods' perspective, Rovi's actions just now steering Gilgamesh back toward the path of a wise king were undeniably significant. So even though he'd brought the great festival to an abrupt and unexpected halt, the gods had no intention of punishing him. It was, in the end, a matter of priorities. But it was precisely because he understood all this that Rovi felt even more like crying. What is even happening? How did things get so far from what I expected? He forced down his urge to rant, steadied himself, and looked around. The temple's light was unchanged, the ring of statues still watched over him. After the god's decree faded with the last of the divine glow, the priests began to rise to their feet. High Priest. Rovi turned to the old man. The old priest met his gaze. Then, with a slow, reverent gesture, he extended a withered arm from beneath his linen robe, lifting the hem as he bowed, honor to the divine messenger. At his words, the other priests immediately followed suit. One after another, they bowed in respect. Praised and acknowledged by the gods, with their favor openly bestowed, Rovi was now, in their eyes, no less than a messenger of the gods. Such a status surpassed any mere priesthood. In some ways, it was nearly on par with the king himself. Of course, only in some ways. In reality, the king of Uruk controlled military, civic, diplomatic, and religious affairs with absolute authority, leaving no room for doubt or challenge. But even symbolic equality with the king was unheard of in Uruk's history. The problem was, this was the last thing Rovi wanted. He sighed. High Priest, everyone, you really don't have to be so formal. I just got lucky, that's all. The others had no idea what he was really thinking. Seeing that he showed not a hint of pride, they secretly praised his calm, steady temperament. Not knowing that all the joy was theirs, Rovi felt nothing at all. But things were what they were, regret was pointless now. He didn't have the ability to turn back time. All he could do was move forward. He hadn't died this time, but surely there would be plenty more chances in the future. After all, the era he'd landed in was anything but peaceful. It's hard to live here. Surely dying can't be that hard. Rovi's spirits lifted again. The king commands. A voice rang out from outside the temple doors. A tall figure stepped in, helmeted and armored, every stride exuding authority. He was the king's herald. One of Gilgamesh's royal guard, charged with delivering the king's decrees across Uruk. His boots rang crisply on the stone floor as he strode into the hall. The priests tensed, some growing anxious at the imposing sight. Is the king going to punish Rovi after all? Gilgamesh had never done so before, and though he was known for his ruthlessness, he'd always honored his word in the end. But those who'd witnessed his wild, unpredictable actions over the years no longer dared guess what he might do next. Who could read the mind of such a king? Rovi was just as surprised. Before he could puzzle out what this sudden summons meant, the herald had already swept his gaze over the assembled priests and spoken. The king commands, he proclaimed, Rovi, temple priest, though you spoke out of turn and defied the great king of Uruk, the king is generous and broad-minded, his wisdom shines like the stars, his heart is as vast as the heavens. He understands your intentions were good, so he holds no grudge over your insolence, and will even raise you up. The king commands you to serve as his vizier, attending him at the royal palace starting tomorrow. Typical of Gilgamesh's herald, all pomp and bluster, through and through. Rovi was speechless. Part of him was disappointed this wasn't a punishment at all, but another part was almost excited. Serving at the king's side anywhere else, it might be a coveted post. But with Gilgamesh, that was another story. Serving a king is like living with a tiger. That saying didn't even exist in this era, but there was no better description of Gilgamesh. A king whose moods shifted on a whim, there was nothing more terrifying. Any careless word or act might bring disaster. And yet, that was exactly what Rovi wanted. Thinking it over, as the protagonist of the world's oldest epic, Gilgamesh was destined to face no shortage of peril. So after the herald departed, Rovi, the supposed victim, was left to comfort the now miserable priests. "Gentlemen, there's no need to worry," he declared with a smile. "Serving at the king's side is exactly what I hoped for. If I can help the king change for the better, all the more reason to be glad." If he was going to play this role in their eyes, he might as well play it to the hilt. His words brought the others back to themselves. "We're old men now, not half as open-hearted as you," the high priest said with a wry smile. "If we can't compare, so be it," another priest huffed, stretching his legs. With all the people in Uruk, who could possibly match him? To speak so boldly before the king, and even win the favor of the gods. There was no one else like Rovi in all of Uruk or all of Mesopotamia, for that matter. "Say, young Rovi doesn't have a wife yet, does he? What about my granddaughter? Your granddaughter's only 5 or 6, isn't she? What are you thinking?" "Well, it's better than your daughter, who's nearly 40. The atmosphere grew oddly lively. People really are the same everywhere. Even those who served the gods were, in the end, just people. It was a scene straight out of Rovi's former life, when elders who favored him would start matchmaking. But as they joked, Rovi's thoughts drifted away to the palace where the king resided. "Time to work out a new plan, Your Majesty." Within the vast palace, up the 99 steps to the throne, Gilgamesh, just back from the temple, opened his eyes. He shifted slightly on the throne, crimson gaze settling on the speaker. A woman veiled in gauze. His current vizier. Priest Rovi has accepted the appointment. She bowed respectfully. "Also, there have been footprints discovered on the altar in the temple of Ishtar. It appears, the goddess Ishtar herself has descended." Gilgamesh's lazy gaze sharpened at once. Chapter 7, Fate Ascend 7. 1,117 words. Among the gods of the Mesopotamian plains, Ishtar held a particularly unique place. She presided over beauty, fertility, and war. She was one of the youngest among the gods, and by far the most spoiled and indulged by her divine kin. Because of that, Ishtar was more willful and capricious than any of her peers, a goddess notorious for being the most troublesome of them all. Especially for Gilgamesh. He might look down on the rest of the gods, but when it came to this goddess, he'd rather not see her at all. And for good reason. Ishtar had once pretended to court him. The goddess of beauty loved beautiful things, and Gilgamesh was her perfect target, but the young king of Uruk knew all too well the ways of the gods. He understood that Ishtar's so-called affection was nothing more than a desire to toy with him. Back in the days when the gods could still descend in person, Gilgamesh had already suffered more than enough of her attention. Now, hearing rumors of her return, he couldn't help but go pale. It was a rare expression for the king. Sidui, the royal vizier, stood holding armfuls of clay tablets, each inscribed with reports from across Uruk, her eyes lowered, silent. And then she heard Gilgamesh mutter under his breath, "That woman again. No, the age of the gods is in its final decline. Those foolish, rotting gods can't descend in the flesh anymore." His crimson eyes, with their serpent-like pupils, narrowed dangerously. Sidui knew he was activating the highest-level clairvoyance, common enough among Magi, but rare to such a degree in a king that it could pierce through time itself. With it, he gazed into the future, seeking the answer to now from what was yet to come. "So that's it, divine possession?" The glow faded from his eyes. Gilgamesh understood. The gods could not appear in their true forms anymore, but their nature, higher than the mortal world, still gave them plenty of ways to interfere. Like sending their consciousness to possess the body of a living human. Gilgamesh shook his head and looked to his vizier below. "Tch, in the end they're nothing but moldy worms crawling through the dirt." Even now, they dare to give orders to me, the sun that sits above all others. Sidui. He waved, rising to his feet. I am here, my king. The vizier bowed. They say the Babylonian treasury is nearly complete. I'm going to inspect it. Gilgamesh's voice was suddenly ice-cold. If that woman arrives, stop her. Don't let her pester me. Yes, your majesty. Sidui nodded, asking nothing more. Gilgamesh had no interest in seeing Ishtar. He knew full well that the goddess would seek him out the moment she arrived, and odds were high that words would quickly give way to violence. Even in her possessed form, Ishtar might not be his match. And Gilgamesh couldn't guarantee he wouldn't simply kill her outright. But for now, Gilgamesh's disdain for the gods hadn't yet turned into open hatred. Self-centered as he was still a king, and that meant weighing his actions. I won't let it trouble you, Sidui promised earnestly. Good. Gilgamesh turned to go deeper into the palace, but paused mid-stride, a rare smile flickering over his lips. Ah, I've arranged for you to have an interesting colleague. He should be along soon. Get along with that that man. He'll add a little excitement to your dull life. Bwahaha. With a peal of arrogant laughter, the king's figure disappeared down the hall. Sidui stood clutching her clay tablets, quietly smiling to herself. At that moment, the palace guards' voices rang out. Priest Rovi, the king says you may enter directly. No need to announce yourself. I understand. A young voice replied. He really did arrive just as the king said. Sidui glanced up toward the doors and saw a tall figure in linen priest's robes cross the threshold, striding toward the throne. He was young, a man, or perhaps a youth. Tall and slender, with jet-black hair and eyes, handsome features, and a calm, tranquil air about him. It was, unmistakably, Rovi. After reassuring the priests at the temple, he'd come straight here. His eagerness had only cemented the priests' admiration, and convinced them that Rovi's bold words at the festival were truly out of concern for Gilgamesh's future. But for Rovi, it was all just about getting closer to Gilgamesh so he could die. So he'd rushed here without even changing out of his linen priest's robes, his steps echoing through the vast, polished expanse of the palace as he approached the towering throne. The great hall was vast, sunlight streaming in, pillars soaring upward, its walls and floors gleaming like mirrors, far grander even than the Pantheon. But unlike the Pantheon, this was not the legacy of Uruk's ancient kings. This was built by Gilgamesh himself. It had been forced into existence through his ruthless, iron-fisted rule. Was he trying to show that royal authority needn't bow to the gods? Rovi wondered, raising his eyes to meet the figure on the dais above. Priest Rovi, no, I suppose I should call you Vizier Rovi from now on. The female vizier spoke up, her voice clear and pleasant. Good day, Vizier Sidui, Rovi replied. For those who posed no threat to his plans for a spectacular death, he was always polite. There was no point in angering her, better to keep life free of unnecessary resentment. Where's the king? Rovi asked, stepping onto the stairs, glancing at the empty throne. The king, his off attending to business. Sidui replied. But before he left, he did leave you and I a task. A task? What kind of task? Is it important? Rovi paused. His first thought, is this something dangerous enough to get me killed if I screw it up? Sidui clearly misunderstood. Don't worry, it's nothing major, just something we can handle with a minimum of effort. That goddess won't trouble mere mortals like us. Goddess? Could it be? Gilgamesh. A shrill voice rang out from beyond the palace. Hurry up and come greet the beautiful mistress of heaven, Ishtar herself. It really was Ishtar. Sidui shook her head. Didn't expect her to show up so quickly. Rovi's eyes, on the other hand, lit up. Even aside from all he'd learned before transmigrating, his experience as a priest in this life made him more than familiar with this goddess. He knew exactly how headstrong and willful she could be. He'd just been pondering how to get himself killed again. It was a pity he hadn't managed a second death-defying remonstration with Gilgamesh, but now, wasn't a brand new opportunity knocking at his door? Chapter 8, Fate Ascend 8. 1145 words. Outside the palace hall, the goddess radiated a menacing aura. Sidui knew full well the royal guards couldn't stop her, but by the time she thought to warn them away, it was already too late. Ishtar was never a goddess known for patience. The next moment, with a thunderous crash, sunlight blazing and dust whirling up, golden sand filled the air outside the doors, veiling everything in shimmering waves. And from within that swirling dust, a slender figure strode in with graceful, unhurried steps. As impulsive as ever, Lady Ishtar. Sidui managed a helpless smile. As a royal advisor, she'd had plenty of dealings with the gods over the years, and knew this goddess's temperament all too well. Rovi, standing nearby, said nothing, just followed Sidui's gaze toward the entrance. Emerging from the haze was a figure with long, jet-black hair. Her form was not voluptuous, but rather sleek and athletic. Her revealing clothes barely covered what was necessary, leaving pale skin exposed, a blend of sacredness and wickedness in every step. But Rovi blinked in surprise. Wait, isn't that Tosaka Rin? In his original world, in the Type Moon series, she was the Tsunda twin-tailed heroine of a certain story. So this is possession, then? It made sense. The gods couldn't descend in person anymore. If Ishtar appeared through possession, it wasn't a stretch. And Tosaka Rin really is a perfect vessel for Ishtar. Rovi stayed silent, quietly revising and recalculating his plan. Ishtar, meanwhile, swept her gaze through the hall, only to find no sign of Gilgamesh. She paused, then grew annoyed, daring to avoid an audience with the beautiful and noble goddess Gilgamesh. You're getting bolder by the day. Lady Ishtar, His Majesty is attending to state business. If you could. Silence. Sidui barely got the words out before Ishtar's glare cut her off. Did I give you permission to speak? Me. Hiding from me, thinking I can't do anything about it. Don't underestimate me. The black-haired goddess's lips curled in a mocking smirk. Her crimson eyes glinted sharply. Maybe I'll just tear this place apart. Let's see if you still ignore me then, Gilgamesh. She raised a slender, pale hand, golden light gathering at her palm and morphing into the shape of a longbow. It was the physical manifestation of Venus. The power of that dazzling morning star shining over Mesopotamia. In that instant, an immense pressure filled the vast palace, invisible currents sweeping out from Ishtar as their center. She didn't care about the lives inside, or the stress this might bring Uruk as a nation. As the most spoiled of all the gods, Ishtar had always been like this. Sidui could only sigh in resignation. If this palace was destroyed, Gilgamesh's temper might really erupt into a full-on battle with the goddess. And that was exactly what Sidui, as royal advisor, wanted to avoid. Her orders were clear: don't let Ishtar bother the king. She'd have to stall her. Luckily, Sidui was experienced enough. All she needed to do was tell Ishtar the king was communing with his divine mother. Even a willful goddess would hold back, if only out of deference to another goddess. It wouldn't solve things for good, but it would buy time. But while Sidui was ready to intervene, Rovi had other plans. Lady Ishtar. Rovi stepped down from the dais, standing tall under the mounting pressure, as if struggling to hold his ground before the goddess. Oh! A new face. Ishtar plucked at the golden bowstring, flicking her dark hair over one shoulder. Not bad looking, I suppose, but still not up to my standards. Step aside. You can't stop me. Actually, if you don't, I'll just smash you and this palace to pieces. She flashed a smile that was anything but kind. Seeing her like this, Rovi actually relaxed. He'd worried that Ishtar, appearing through a mortal vessel, might be toned down by Tosaka Rin's influence, less divine, less ruthless, ruining his death wish plan. But this. Even if there was some influence, it was minimal. At the very least, the goddess of Venus's disregard for human life was absolutely genuine. Apart from Gilgamesh, she considered everything else beneath notice. Still, Rovi mentally prepared a particularly targeted speech to make sure he'd succeed. I'm not stepping aside. Rovi shook his head, meeting Ishtar's gaze with an air of unwavering resolve. He said, I know you, Ishtar, goddess of beauty, war, and harvest. Legend says you're the most beautiful among the gods, with countless admirers, your brilliance dazzling as the morning star, outshining all the heavens. At least you have some taste. Your looks are nowhere near Gilgamesh's, but your sense is 100 times sharper than his. Ishtar laughed, quite pleased with herself. But nothing stops a goddess cold like that word. Seeing you in person, I have to say I'm disappointed. What did you say? Her smile froze, confusion flickering over her beautiful features. You're not nearly as beautiful as the legends say. In fact, you're pretty ugly. Staring the self-proclaimed goddess of beauty in the eye and calling her ugly, nothing could be more suicidal. Ishtar was stunned. Sidui, standing higher on the steps, choked in disbelief. You boorish mortal, do you have any idea what you're saying? Ishtar's expression darkened, the light of Venus's bow glowing even brighter, the pressure mounting, making it even harder for Rovi to stand tall. But he only smiled, undaunted. Of course I do, Rovi replied. What I'm saying is, the so-called goddess of beauty doesn't understand beauty at all. In this world, all beautiful things fade with time, magnificent landscapes, fleeting sunsets. Whether it's people or things, everything passes eventually. The only thing eternal is the spirit. True beauty is born from within. But looking at you, all I see inside is arrogance, cruelty, self-absorption, nothing beautiful about that. Nothing at all. I see only ugliness and stench, an ugly exterior, and a rotten soul. So honestly, it's no wonder King Gilgamesh avoids you. Rovi clapped his hands, feigning sudden realization. Who wouldn't do the same? Honestly, I ought to commend you, at least in the matter of ugliness. You really are unique. He grew utterly serious. Distinctly, authentically ugly. Ishtar stood frozen, seemingly unable to process what he'd just said. For a heartbeat, even Sidui on the stairs was struck speechless. You stupid little mortal, do you even know? Ishtar's face twisted, Venus's bow radiating so fiercely that Rovi could barely stay on his feet. But he kept smiling, utterly unafraid. Of course I know, he said. I'm saying the so-called goddess of beauty doesn't know the first thing about true beauty. He let the words linger. Ishtar's mind was swirling. Are you trying to talk yourself to death? Fine, keep talking, see if I don't shoot you into the ground. I swear I won't kill you. Tn. Yes, even Rin's beauty can't save Ishtar from her ugliness. Chapter 9. Fate Ascend 9. 1134 words. Ishtar's chest heaved with fury. For a moment, she wondered if Rovi was insane. She just stood there, dumbfounded, her anger so overwhelming that even she didn't know how to react. Sidui could only hold her forehead in her hand. To tell a goddess of beauty, to her face, that she's ugly and doesn't understand beauty. Even as Gilgamesh's advisor, this was the first time she'd ever seen such a thing. Not even that willful king would go so far. Though, to be fair, Rovi wasn't wrong. Ishtar, for all her power, had never truly brought beauty to humanity. Given her authority and her reckless personality, her every descent to the mortal world was an ordeal, a living hell for those caught in her wake. Beautiful? How could it be? Of course, this was something many understood, but no one would ever dare say it, especially not to her face. No wonder the king admires him. Sidui thought, suddenly understanding. They really are the same kind of person. She felt a headache coming on. But no matter how much Sidui worried, nothing could undo what Rovi had just done. The Grand Temple's air was still, dust drifting down as thin light shimmered over the polished stone floor. Silence settled over the scene. Rovi stared right at Ishtar. In some ways, this goddess, pampered by all the gods, wasn't so different from Gilgamesh. Both were born extraordinary. Neither had ever faced true defeat. So neither had ever been openly rebuked. It was only natural that she was at a loss for words, at least for a moment. But Rovi knew this frozen instant was just the calm before the storm. Like hell she's going to tolerate this. Sure enough, Ishtar recovered quickly, tossing her black hair back, crimson eyes boring into the young man before her. So, you really have a death wish, mortal. Her voice, now eerily calm, lost all its previous inflection. It was the composure of the divine. The chill of a goddess's wrath. What do you think, goddess of ugliness, Lady Ishtar? Rovi pressed on, undaunted. Why not just admit it? You're just a plain old eyesore. He burst out laughing. Bastard. You wretched, ignorant fool of a human. Ishtar's composure shattered in an instant, all Rovi's mockery finally breaking her self-control. I'll kill you, I swear, I'll kill you. The light in her hands flared even brighter, Venus blazing, the bowstring trembling. There were barely 10 meters between them at this range. If Rovi was struck, there'd be nothing left of him but dust. But Rovi stood his ground, looking Ishtar in the eye. Prepared to die. It might not be a remonstrance before the king, but to face down a goddess and mock her so directly, surely that would be enough to carve his name into legend, into myth. That was enough. To be remembered meant the throne of heroes would accept him. Death was nothing to fear. But what Rovi didn't know was that Sidui had no intention of letting him die. Never mind Gilgamesh's orders for Sidui, just seeing Rovi now was enough to make up her mind. Her job was to advise the king. Sidui's loyalty to Gilgamesh bordered on faith. Whatever he wished, she would see it done, flawlessly. And Rovi, to her, he seemed to be the same. Someone who could truly understand Gilgamesh. Someone who also had no respect for the gods, reckless and fearless. Even if it was a bit reckless, that similarity alone was enough. So in a single moment, Sidui decided, she'd intervene. Wisps of light flickered around her form. A royal attendant, after all, wasn't powerless. Any treasure tossed her way by Gilgamesh could dramatically raise her strength. Sidui was not weak. If it costs me my life, I'll save Vizier Rovi from Ishtar's wrath. Her gaze burned with resolve. She crouched, ready to spring. At the same time, Ishtar's arrow was unleashed, dazzling light exploded out, not so much an arrow as a flat, surging wave, red and gold swirling together, filling the air like a rain of fire. It was as if a star was falling. A force no mortal could possibly withstand. A blow of pure, wrathful power from the goddess of Venus. But just as Sidui was about to leap forward, she froze, halted by a sudden voice in her ear. Wait, Sidui. The king's voice. She spun around, shocked. Gilgamesh had reappeared on the throne, resting his chin on one hand, his crimson eyes watching the scene below with amusement. Just watch, Gilgamesh said. Sidui fell silent, and looked. Below, Rovi faced the goddess's strike head-on. He closed his eyes, unmoving. Boom. The explosion shook the palace, dust billowed, pillars trembled. The goddess's voice thundered out, for defying a god, you shall suffer divine punishment. The shockwave rushed in, air shrieking, making Rovi's scalp tingle, his whole body trembling from the force. A death in a single instant, painless. Perfect. Rovi smiled even brighter. And then, just as he waited for oblivion, a strange sound echoed in his ears. Click. Like a key falling into a lock, turning, gears within gears clicking open. What was that sound? It lasted only a moment, but Rovi was startled, and then he saw something appear before him. A golden ripple, blooming from nothing. What is this? This is the treasury of treasures I've gathered from all the world, the crystallization of my wisdom and might, the vault of Babylon. Even though it still lacks the supreme treasure to serve as its keystone, and isn't yet fully complete, it is still a hoard that only I can command. From the throne, Gilgamesh's crimson eyes glittered, his fingers tapping the armrest. A mongrel so wretched has become a thing of nightmares, but one who stands fearless in defiance of the rotten gods, his spirit is worthy of my recognition. You see, even my vault has acknowledged him, opening its gates and offering its treasures for his use. Sidui watched Gilgamesh, half amused. As if it wasn't your own decision to give him a treasure. She turned to look at Rovi again. He was close enough to hear the king's words, too. The vault of Babylon? Is this Tiachi vault of Babylon? He stared in shock at the golden ripple before him. It really did look just like the gate of Babylon from his memories of Gilgamesh's noble phantasm. Wait. Didn't this mean he couldn't die after all? No way. Don't. It should have been a triumphant moment, but Rovi was struck by horror. It was too late. Venus's power crashed down. From the golden ripples of the gate of Babylon, countless treasures flew out at once. The resulting explosion formed an invisible barrier at the center. Dust swirled madly. But though the air churned, Rovi remained untouched, standing behind the shield, expressionless. How am I still alive? Chapter 10, Fate Ascend 10. 1132 words. It wasn't just that Rovi didn't die. He could distinctly feel himself growing stronger. Not that this newfound strength came from within, it was entirely external. Specifically, the key Gilgamesh had given him, granting access to the treasury of Babylon. Within that treasury was an endless arsenal of treasures collected by Gilgamesh. Many were even capable of enhancing the user's abilities on their own. For anyone else, this would be a blessing. But for Rovi, it was the last thing he wanted because it would only make his quest all the harder. He glanced up toward the throne, at the radiant golden figure seated atop the steps. Just as his gaze met Gilgamesh's blood-red eyes, the king grinned and declared, "Spare me the thanks. I have no desire to hear your filthy mongrels barking again. Of course, I am a generous king. Originally, after your clownish performance, I thought to grant you a single treasure as a reward." Gilgamesh clapped his hands. "But now, after this even more amusing display, you've earned a greater reward, so I'll lend you the use of my vault. Be grateful." As always, his words were full of self-praise and casual contempt for others. Rovi knew there was no refusing him. He just shook his head and muttered, "Idiot," still hoping to provoke him. But for whatever reason, Gilgamesh didn't take offense. In fact, he looked all the more entertained when it came to like-minded souls. He was surprisingly tolerant of any amount of insolence. Sidui, watching, felt a sudden urge to check whether the king had been swapped for someone else. "Ah, you dare ignore me?" Finally, Ishtar, snapped out of her shock at her failed attack, returned to her senses. The black-haired, fiercely beautiful goddess shot a glare at Gilgamesh on the throne, then fixed her red eyes on Rovi. There was no way she hadn't realized it was Gilgamesh who'd intervened on Rovi's behalf, gifting him a powerful treasure. But at this moment, she found herself uncaring about Gilgamesh. Because Rovi's brazen insults had left her feeling a level of humiliation she'd never experienced before, not since Gilgamesh himself had rebuffed her. But now, after her attack failed, she had cooled off somewhat. Suddenly, she realized that if she simply killed Rovi, it would be an admission of defeat. As if conceding that she, the goddess of beauty, really didn't understand beauty and was, in fact, ugly, even in this possessed form. And she was not willing to accept such a humiliation. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling beneath her clothing, then smiled at Rovi. "Rovi, is it? I'll remember you. No one's ever called me ugly to my face or claimed I know nothing of beauty. You're the first." In the vast, radiant throne room, sunlight streamed through the latticework dome, dust motes swirling in columns of light. The goddess flipped her hair, eyes lingering on the golden portals of the vault of Babylon swirling around Rovi. She smiled, her lips even redder than before. "But next time, I'll show you what it means to witness a goddess's true beauty. Just you wait." "You bastard. Wait a second, weren't you here to find Gilgamesh? Why is all your attention on me now?" Rovi had an ominous sense that he'd outsmarted himself. It was all too clear. The humiliation he'd given her was even deeper than the simple rejection she'd gotten from Gilgamesh. So Ishtar, naturally, had transferred her affections. Rovi wanted to object. But Ishtar wasn't giving him a chance. She vanished without another word. A peal of laughter came from the throne. "Ha! I must admit, you really do have a talent for clownery. That was the best entertainment I've had in ages." "That just means your sense of humor is about as low as a bug's," Rovi replied, eyes deadpan and utterly unfiltered. Sidui blinked in surprise. She'd gotten used to their banter, but hadn't heard what happened in the temple, nor had she fully adjusted to Rovi's ways. But what startled her even more was, "Chmph. Even if I'm a bug, I shine like the blazing sun, dazzling all the sky with my brilliance," Gilgamesh declared, totally unashamed. "You're actually owning it." Sidui barely resisted the urge to cover her face. "Still a bug," Rovi muttered, stepping up onto the dais. "A stinking bug. If I'm a bug, then what are you? A ball of dung? If I'm a dung ball, then you're the maggot inside it." Watching this bizarre back and forth, Sidui fell silent, then, all of a sudden, burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" Rovi and Gilgamesh stopped at once, both looking her way. No way would Sidui answer honestly to the king. She just thought, Gilgamesh and Rovi, they really do bicker like friends. It was a scene she'd never seen before. The lofty king, no longer alone. "Mph, you think he's ridiculous too, don't you?" Gilgamesh said with mock understanding. "The ridiculous one is you, Goldie," Rovi shot back. "Goldie?" The young king of Uruk frowned, not understanding. "I mean your constant gold-plated, stuck-up attitude." Rovi snorted. "Gold-plated, huh? An excellent title for a great king such as myself." Gilgamesh brightened, catching the gist, if not the spirit. But Rovi had lost interest in bickering. He went to sit on the steps beside the throne. So much had happened in one day, so many twists and turns, that he was genuinely exhausted. Time to think of a new plan. After this string of failures, Rovi was starting to wonder if he needed to rethink his approach. As Rovi sat, neither Gilgamesh nor Sidui said a word about it. Truth be told, Rovi's conduct, barring his temper, was the very model of a loyal retainer. Especially his fearless stand against Ishtar, it had the air of a true champion, a paragon of loyalty. With that on his record, any other faults could be forgiven. Why is it that no matter how rude I am, Gilgamesh never gets angry? Rovi wondered, lost in thought. Even exile to the border would be fine. "Your Majesty," Sidui's voice interrupted his musings. "There's a matter that requires your attention." Gilgamesh waved a hand. "Speak." His gaze returned to its usual cool sharpness. Sidui inclined her head. "It's about the forest of magical beasts to the west." "There's trouble again." Gilgamesh eyed her. "Yes." The young vizier nodded. "The beast's rampage is causing serious problems for our border settlements. My suggestion is to send a powerful warrior to seal off the forest's entrances for good, but in all of Uruk, only I, the great king, have that strength, isn't that right?" Gilgamesh sneered. "Tch, a bunch of worthless fools." Sidui said nothing more, but her meaning was clear. She knew the king would not refuse. I love Gil. Chapter 11, Fate Ascend 11. 1202 words. In this land, Gilgamesh was recognized by all as a tyrant. He showed no reverence to the gods, wielded power over life and death among his subjects, and from atop his throne, he arbitrarily decided the fate of the people, seizing the property and lives of his ministers at will. But at the end of the day, Gilgamesh was a tyrant, not a fool. Nor was he a mediocre king. As the one who ruled this nation, he had never given up on governance. It was just that, due to his extreme self-centeredness and capriciousness, he often made decisions that seemed absurd to ordinary people, and the means by which he ruled were cruel and domineering. Yet precisely because he was so self-absorbed, Gilgamesh valued the safety of his nation all the more. The country belonged to the king. He could dispose of it as he pleased, but would never tolerate outsiders meddling, much less allow anything foreign to invade or bring harm. "Anyone who dares encroach upon my territory, I will make those vermin who crawl in the gutters understand, what belongs to the king shall never be trampled at will." Gilgamesh rose to his feet, and under Sidui's watchful gaze, made his decision without hesitation. He would personally travel to the western border to resolve the crisis there. What no one noticed, however, was that Rovi, who had been sitting carelessly on the steps, completely unconcerned with decorum, had already begun to hatch a plan. And just then, Rovi stood up as well. "Wait." He stood, looking toward Gilgamesh and Sidui at the foot of the throne, dusting off his linen robe, which was smudged with ash and dirt. "I'll go," Rovi declared. "You're the king. A king shouldn't be moved lightly." His reasoning was simple. Since getting Gilgamesh and the gods to kill him hadn't worked out, he might as well settle for the next best thing. He wanted to leave Uruk's royal city, to head for the dangerous frontier. He knew about the monster-infested forest in the west, a place crawling with magical beasts year-round. It was dangerous, terrifying, a major threat to Uruk. Even with heavy patrols to keep ordinary people away, beast rampages still happened from time to time. But if Rovi volunteered for the task and went with the king's warrant, the Uruk guards couldn't stop him from approaching. And then, He could stage a suitably tragic end for himself. Whether by accident or being surrounded, it would be enough to go down in the annals of history and become a legend. Of course, Sidui couldn't possibly agree. Rovi, Vizier, I'm afraid you. She meant to say Rovi wasn't strong enough, but the words died in her throat. Because, all of a sudden, several golden ripples flared around Rovi, and swords and treasures slid out from within, scattering crystal light into the air. The right to use the Gate of Babylon, bestowed by Gilgamesh. Sidui was stunned. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, let out another laugh. Chemph, ha ha ha. For a mutt that yaps so loud, you've picked up the use of my treasures rather quickly. I'll admit, that's a bit of a surprise. Then he added, very well. In that case, take the king's treasures and go show those fools the brilliance of your king. Speak normal words, will you? Rovi rolled his eyes, entirely ungracious. I am the one true king above heaven and earth. Naturally, my words are the language of kings. The language of mortals is unfit to restrain me. Gilgamesh sneered. What you should restrain is that revolting, dog-like barking of yours. Here we go again. Watching the two bicker like children, Sidui sighed silently. She realized, suddenly, that perhaps she'd have to get used to this sort of environment from now on. But seeing Rovi wield the Gate of Babylon so skillfully, the young vizier understood that, with the king's treasures alone, Rovi had more than enough qualification to stand in for Gilgamesh and suppress the monster outbreak. Enough nonsense. Rovi glanced out of the palace. The sky was already dusky blue, the sinking sun painting the city with fiery light, like maple leaves turning the hills red. He shook his head, not bothering with farewells, and strode down the steps toward the palace gates. Gilgamesh scoffed, a hint of a smile in his crimson eyes, reflecting the figure draped in linen, slender, yet unwavering. If you're to go to battle in my stead, even a filthy stray dog ought to shine with brilliance. Those beasts in the west have gnawed in the gutters for years. I'd rather not see my envoy come back covered in mud. That would hardly do my image any favors. You should worry about yourself first, can't you speak like a normal person? Rovi paused, glanced back at him, shook his head, and walked on without another word. He could tell, of course, that Gilgamesh was showing concern. Even if he didn't understand why Gilgamesh treated him this way, Rovi knew the king truly acknowledged him now. Despite his yearning for death, Rovi was still just a regular person. He couldn't help but be moved, just a little. But, anyway, men who talk in circles are just disgusting. Sidui listened to Rovi's voice drifting in from outside and wisely kept her eyes on the floor, her mind on her breathing. Chemph, ha ha ha. Right back at you. Gilgamesh burst out laughing. Right back at you. From childhood to now, no one had ever dared offend him like this and actually managed to make him genuinely not angry. A man who, like me, holds no reverence for the gods. Let's see if you have what it takes to stand at my side as my equal, as my friend. The king's low voice echoed in the grand hall. Atop the tall steps and the glittering throne, the king waved a languid hand. Out the door, Rovi paused for a moment. Before him lay Uruk, growing quiet in the twilight, trees swaying by the gates, an old yellow dog teetering at the threshold, travelers returning from afar, a young man conscripted for labor bidding his parents goodbye. Those earth and stone buildings, laid out in neat rows, this vast city housing over 100,000 souls in this prehistoric human civilization, a world that could only exist with the gods present. But this was already the limit. The gods would not allow mankind's unity, that would hasten the erasure of their traces from the world. In the early days, the gods' presence had undoubtedly aided humanity. But now, they had become shackles. Not that it mattered to him. At least for now, he had no interest in interfering, he only wanted to die. Rovi looked up and caught a glimpse of a star falling through the sky. A shooting star, not bad. He thought to himself. Maybe my life could be like that star, leaving its name etched in the history of humanity, then vanishing in an instant. Wait. If I remember right, in the age of myth, a falling star means something from the heavens is descending to the mortal world, right? Besides Ishtar, who's currently in a vessel. So what's coming this time? Rovi's instincts sharpened at once. Chapter 12, Fate Ascend 12. 1,173 words. Once again, something was descending from the heavens where the gods dwelled. Rovi recognized this immediately. He couldn't say exactly what it was, but as a transmigrator, Rovi naturally possessed a perspective far beyond this era. He knew the stories that would be told in later generations, of events on the Mesopotamian plains, in Uruk. He knew that Gilgamesh would one day be remembered as the oldest of hero kings. So Rovi knew, too, that Gilgamesh was not always alone. Later on, he would have a companion named Enkidu, a human-shaped weapon molded by the gods from clay. Is it Enkidu this time? Or maybe the goddess Aruru, who shaped Enkidu's body from earth to carry the power of the gods herself? In theory, Enkidu's appearance was indeed due soon. But now was not the time to dig into that, because, for the moment, whoever or whatever it was wouldn't affect Rovi's plans in any meaningful way. Right now, he had something else to deal with. You said, after I left, the gods bestowed a relic upon me. With night not yet fallen, Rovi had returned to the temple. He'd only meant to pack up and bid farewell to the elderly priests who had cared for him, but the high priest stopped him with this news right away. Yes. Firelight flickered in the chamber where Rovi had once inscribed cuneiform tablets. The room's stone walls were stacked with neat blocks, the floors carved with countless intricate patterns of the gods. There, the thin and aged priest regarded the young Rovi, and nodded. He said, Rovi, your sincerity moved the heavens. The great and merciful gods pitied your struggles and granted you a divine relic. Rovi wanted to say no, thank you, but after a moment's thought, he held back. Might as well see what it is first. I don't know exactly what it is, either, the priest said. But the gods told me, as long as I gave it to you, you'd understand. He could see the uncertainty in Rovi's eyes, so he placed the item into Rovi's hand. It was a key. Rovi took the crystal object, barely the size of a finger, and blinked in surprise. There was no doubt, the divine relic the high priest mentioned was a key. And the instant he touched it, a rush of information poured out from the key itself, letting Rovi instinctively understand its name and function. The key of heaven. Gilgamesh served as the wedge of heaven, the link between gods and mortals. Enkidu, soon to come, would be the chains of heaven, created to restore the bond between Gilgamesh and the gods. And now, what the gods had given Rovi was something similar. A key that could cross the boundary between heaven and earth. There was no mistaking it, the gods meant for Rovi, like Enkidu, to become an important bond guiding Gilgamesh back to the path of wisdom. Those guys. They really have high hopes for me. Rovi pocketed the key, without refusing. Thank goodness it wasn't some artifact of immortality. The key of heaven's main function was simply to free Rovi from the god's suppression. He could act freely anywhere, unaffected by divine power. That, at least, was useful. And after all, in every age, the heroes the gods pinned their hopes on often met tragic ends. Either dying gloriously in some calamity, or vanishing like a shooting star, leaving behind only regret. That was exactly what Rovi wanted. So this flag he'd gladly take. Thank you, High Priest. Rovi turned to the old man and bowed solemnly. Thank you for everything. The High Priest paused, then smiled. I always hoped you would inherit my place as High Priest of this country, he said, but perhaps this is for the best. The stage beside the king is far larger than this one. Go on, pursue your ideals, hero. Rovi smiled and nodded. Whatever the future might hold, at least these people had always been sincere with him, and Rovi would not disregard their kindness. And with that, it was time to set out. Just what is inner beauty, anyway? In a remote corner of Uruk, inside a grand and secluded temple, gems embedded in the domed ceiling caught and scattered the light, illuminating the opulent hall. A goddess, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, sat directly on the floor. Her chest rose and fell slightly, she crossed her legs, gesturing idly with delicate hands. Her beautiful face was troubled. Lady Ishtar, what's wrong? Beside the goddess, an attendant priest couldn't help but voice her concern only to be cut off by Ishtar's scolding. Silence. Don't disturb me. No matter how anxious or conflicted she was, the dignity of a goddess remained something mortals could not challenge. The attendant shrank back, dropping to her knees, trembling. Seeing this, Ishtar couldn't help but curl her lips in a pout, falling into deep thought. After her bold intrusion into Gilgamesh's palace earlier that day and being thoroughly mocked by Rovi, the goddess of beauty, always proud of her charm, had been thoroughly provoked. She wanted to make Rovi yield, to make him acknowledge her beauty and submit at her feet. So afterward, back in her temple, Ishtar had been pondering Rovi's words ever since. But this inner beauty. She just didn't get it. I have a question for you, Ishtar finally decided, after a while. Since a mortal had brought it up, asking a mortal should lead her to the answer. Ishtar's crisp voice rang out in the temple, aloof and indifferent. Do you know what inner beauty means? Yes, my lady. The attendant shrank back again. Whatever the gods say is beautiful is beautiful. To obey the gods, to follow their will, that is beauty of the soul. Wrong. Ishtar cut her off. For all her willfulness, she was still a goddess. How could she not hear that the answer was just empty flattery, meant to keep her pleased? But, you understand. You just don't dare say it. Ishtar clapped her hands, making up her mind in an instant. This priestess, at least, had some idea of what Rovi meant by inner beauty. She knew humans understood. As a goddess, Ishtar herself did not. And except for Rovi, perhaps no one else would dare speak plainly to her. But there was no way Ishtar would ask Rovi, not when that would mean admitting defeat. She couldn't ask others, but that didn't mean she couldn't ask herself. After all, the vessel she currently inhabited was a human body. If she couldn't seek answers from others, she could seek them from within. Release the humanity that's always been suppressed by divinity in this body. Ishtar made her decision. Let humanity rise to the surface. With a human perspective and the wisdom of a goddess, she'd surely understand soon enough what inner beauty meant to mortals. And then, Rovi, very soon, I'll make you kneel at my feet. You'll swallow every last word you mocked me with. A spark of confidence flashed in Ishtar's crimson, jewel-like eyes. Chapter 13, Fate Ascend 13. 1067 words. The next day. The sky stretched vast and endless. Western Uruk, just beyond the monster-infested border. The fertile land rolled on, yellow sand sprawling as far as the eye could see. From a distance, Rovi could already see the dense forest rising on the horizon, with guard towers and stone walls standing atop the hill in front of the trees. He knew at once that was the monster forest. The journey here from the city-state of Uruk was uneventful, even with the god's protection. After all, this was still the ancient age. Human footprints had yet to cover the land. All he saw underfoot, aside from dust, was more dust. So Rovi had simply flown here using a flying noble phantasm from Gilgamesh's gate of Babylon. Now, he finally set his feet on the ground. His linen robe whipped wildly in the wind. He approached the guards stationed around the monster forest and announced both his purpose and identity. Honored Vizier Rovi. Before long, the captain of these soldiers, a tall, broad-shouldered man, came out to greet him. You've all worked hard. Rovi glanced over the group, taking in their weather-beaten faces, the battered armor covering only their vitals, the fresh blood seeping through vine-wrapped wounds. It was obvious they'd had a rough time of it. But that was all right. I've come bearing the king's command, Rovi said. From here on, leave it to me. He waved his hand. Golden ripples shimmered around him, gleaming weapons emerging from the air. The soldiers stiffened, awed at once. There was no longer any doubt about his identity. Take me to the front, I want to see the forest beyond the wall. Shouldn't you rest first? The captain asked, unable to hold back. Or at least hear a briefing. The forest is about to erupt again, isn't it? Rovi glanced at him, cutting straight to the point. The big man had nothing to say to that. In truth, by the time the report reached Uruk, there had already been several monster outbreaks. The beasts of the forest seemed drawn by something, madly ramming the walls and defenses again and again. 4 days now, the soldiers had fought almost without pause, there hadn't been a moment to rest. Their weary faces and bloody wounds said as much. Now, even if no one told him, Rovi could sense it, a fresh surge of monsters was coming soon. After all, as a fully initiated priest of Uruk, he could at least read the signs. Of course, there was no way he'd just stand by and watch. "Sir, I still think you should hear the situation first," the captain tried again, seeing Rovi's eagerness to go straight to the front lines. "You're new here, you don't know how dangerous the monster forest is. Inside, even the strongest mortals find their power suppressed. And there are all sorts of accidents waiting in there. No matter how skilled you are, one slip and you could die." Now that sounds promising. Rovi's eyes lit up. The captain was silent. Had the priest understood his warning or not? Rovi caught his odd expression and quickly recovered. "Ahem. I just mean, since I'm the king's envoy, it's only right for me to act. I can't just watch disaster unfold. That would disgrace the king, and none of you want that, do you?" He invoked Gilgamesh's name. There was no further argument. After all, to go against the king's orders would be a stain on the king's reputation. Gilgamesh was a true tyrant, but his strength commanded immense respect among the guards. In the army, no one dared or even thought to defy him. "Let's go." Rovi gestured. "Open the gates. Pull everyone back." "What?" The captain was stunned. "I said, open the gates." "Withdraw the troops," Rovi repeated, hands falling to his sides, smiling, but leaving no room for discussion. "I'm enough on my own." He was blunt, bordering on rude. "You all would only get in my way." After several brushes with disaster, Rovi had learned his lesson. He needed to eliminate every possible accident. These guards, every one a battle-hardened warrior, could easily disrupt his plan. After all, Rovi's goal was to die in an accident. History was full of stories like that. Veteran heroes, facing an enemy they should have defeated, lost everything because of a twist of fate and met a tragic, spectacular end. That's exactly what he wanted. To bloom like a summer flower, to die brilliantly, and leave nothing but regret behind for history to remember. "I speak with the king's authority." Rovi ignored the captain now and raised his voice to address everyone present. "Soldiers, you have already given everything, defending your homes, your nation behind you. You've done more than enough. But what I want you to know is this: you are not alone. You've fulfilled your duty. From here, this is my battlefield." With a deep rumble, the massive stone gate embedded in the great wall slowly rose, gears grinding. Outside, the soldiers remained silent, still gripping swords and spears. Despite their wounds and exhaustion, they kept their eyes fixed on the forest, on the hundreds of scarlet eyes flickering in the shadows. They had fought here countless times, wielding blades to protect their home. They had seen comrades fall, forced themselves to pick up dropped weapons and keep fighting through grief. But now, as Rovi stepped out, as his words echoed over the ramparts, they all froze. "A soldier is one who defends the land. But defense doesn't fall on you alone. You have backup, us." Rovi closed his eyes and walked forward. More golden ripples bloomed around him, sharp swords and treasures emerging, all pointing straight at the massing beasts in the forest beyond. In that moment, morning sunlight painted the dense woods in rainbow hues. The guards fixed their gaze on the young man in the linen robe, slender and tall. Such brilliance. And yet, not the radiance of the gods, but a light that shone for everyone. Unflinching before death. Resolute in the face of disaster. Raw. The monsters, long lurking and restless, finally broke loose under the overwhelming pressure of the Gate of Babylon. They could not be held back. Claws slashed, bodies crashed forward, countless trees toppling as dirt and leaves exploded into the air. The ground shook, a tidal wave of chaos that startled heaven and earth. The monster horde surged. This was an uprising. And more violent, more intense than ever before. Chapter 14, Fate Ascend 14. 1118 words. The Uruk soldiers stationed outside the monster forest looked at each other, moved by Rovi's words, but also shaken by the sheer scale of the monster uprising. There had been signs of trouble. But even these seasoned veterans, tasked with guarding the land outside the forest, couldn't understand why this time the horde was so overwhelming, beyond anything they had ever seen. Yet Rovi remained calm. Because the scope of this riot was his doing, while magical beasts were much more extraordinary than ordinary animals, at the end of the day, they were still beasts. And as long as they were beasts, they could be driven to frenzy by certain outside stimuli. The treasures from the Gate of Babylon, already deployed and gleaming at the forest's edge, were precisely that stimulus. Any treasure worthy of Gilgamesh's collection, while perhaps not on par with the gods, wasn't far behind. Such a display of power delivered a shock of crisis to the magical beasts, and that alone was enough to provoke the chaos now sweeping over the land. "Fall back, this is not something you can withstand," Rovi called out over the roaring flood of beasts and crashing undergrowth, stepping to the other side of the wall and glancing at the guard captain. The young, broad-shouldered warrior hesitated only a moment, knowing they could not delay any longer. "Everyone, retreat inside the wall," he shouted, adding, "Priest, please be careful." The soldiers quickly fell back behind the walls. The gates closed. Now, between the wall and the forest, only Rovi stood alone, facing a storm like thunder made flesh. Around him, the golden ripples of the Gate of Babylon shimmered brighter than ever. Every possible obstacle had been cleared. Rovi smiled. He gripped his priestly robe tighter, and instead of retreating, strode forward to meet the tide. With all eyes upon him, he only grew more cheerful. Not just because his goal was within reach, but also because of what he was doing, here and now. He'd always found his golden finger a bit of a hassle. But the power he'd gained only after dying once, at the apex of the throne of heroes, had always been his one true trump card. With it, he was never afraid of death. With it, things that would have terrified others meant nothing to him. Whether it was cursing out Gilgamesh in public or clashing with Ishtar on the surface, it was all to get himself killed, but in truth, these were things he genuinely wanted to do, but could never have dared otherwise. Right now was no different. Having the Uruk soldiers retreat behind the wall, facing the monstrous horde alone. Defending the border, protecting the homeland. The soldiers of Uruk were all men of unwavering faith. They shouldn't have to die here. They deserved longer lives, more journeys ahead. And besides, I get to be a heroic martyr, just this once. It was a perfect, mutual victory. Rovi stopped in his tracks. The roars of the beasts came crashing in, the world ahead buried in dust and smoke, dozens of blood-red eyes blazing with madness from within. He stretched out his arms. This, of course, wasn't a gesture of surrender. So many were watching, Rovi might want to die, but this wasn't the way he wanted to go. To make a dramatic entrance, only to be torn apart in an instant, that wasn't a hero's death. That was a clown's. Maybe, by sheer luck, a clown could end up on the throne of heroes. But that would never let Rovi take the throne he'd claimed for himself. Otherwise, he could have just killed himself long ago. So Rovi planned to clear a path first and then, just as the script demanded, fake a fatal mistake when only a few monsters remained. At that moment, brilliant streams of light gathered, his noble phantasms vibrating with surging power, their razor edges splitting the air into ribbons of pale white. "If you've got guts, come on then, let's see what you've got." Rovi spread his arms wide, black eyes reflecting an endless army. The once blue sky was now awash in crimson, flooded by the monstrous surge of magical energy. Inside the walls, every soldier held his breath. On the ramparts, all eyes were locked on the scene below. They knew. No matter the outcome, they would never forget what they saw here today. It was a scene that could have come from the height of ancient myth. A mighty hero, his presence alone driving back the monsters that plagued mankind, an ancient sage splitting the sea with a divine staff. There was no need for close combat, no need for steel to cross. The battle was already decided. Indeed. The monster horde, after Rovi's declaration, echoed over the field. Halted, their momentum broken. Then, one after another, they turned and fled. Dust whirled over falling leaves. A silent, empty expanse. Rovi stood frozen, dumbfounded. On the surface, it looked like he'd single-handedly terrified the rampaging monsters into fleeing, the very beasts that had been a scourge on Uruk's borders. But Rovi himself was completely lost. "Wait, why are you all running? Get back here. Are magical beasts really this cowardly?" He wanted to shout his frustration. But very soon, Rovi understood why the monsters had retreated. Is that a song of sorrow? Rovi lifted his head, and with a priest's keen senses, caught a faint resonance beneath the thunderous howls and pounding earth. A song tinged with divinity, but filled with pain. Recalling the shooting star he'd seen before, Rovi suddenly understood. The goddess who made Enkidu. Aruru? It wasn't Enkidu. But the goddess who had shaped Enkidu's vessel from clay to hold the power of the gods. She had landed here, in this forest. And, as later legends told, Enkidu had indeed first been born in a silent, ancient forest. Of course, like Ishtar before, this goddess Aruru was likely present only in a vessel. But a goddess was still a goddess. Even in such a state, her presence surpassed nearly all mortals. Only demigods like Gilgamesh could stand as her equal. The monsters, hearing the clear resonance of her song, wouldn't dare disobey. Maybe this riot had started because the monsters, sensing her imminent arrival, panicked, desperate to flee this place. Rovi fell deep into thought. It said that when the goddess Aruru was tasked by the gods with crafting Enkidu's form, she agonized over her inability to shape it perfectly. And just from the song, you can hear how troubled she is. She's lost confidence in her craft. In that state, it's easy for outside forces to pull her off balance, stir her emotions, make her irritable, quick to anger. Got it. Time to get over there and mock her immediately. Chapter 15, Fate Ascend 15. 1228 words. Among the gods, goddesses were always fearsome beings. Even if all gods were embodiments of natural phenomena, those made manifest by the faith of living creatures differed in more than just appearance. Their patterns of behavior varied as well. The gods who took male forms tended to be rational and steadfast, but prone to stubbornness. The gods in female form were emotional and gentle, but by contrast, could more easily be driven to extremes. Especially when things weren't going their way. At this moment, the goddess Aruru was likely in just such a state. So, Rovi needed to find her. To mock her. To provoke her. And then, to let that influence spiral further during battle. To make her kill him. To let himself die in battle against a god. Rovi turned his head, calling back toward the soldiers within the walls, raising his voice, "I'm heading deeper in. By the king's order, unless you receive new instructions, do not move without leave." "Yes, sir." After what they had just witnessed, the soldiers had no thought of defying Rovi. Even the captain now regarded Rovi as something close to divine. In his eyes, Rovi's status was now second only to Gilgamesh. With the command given, Rovi chased after the retreating tide of magical beasts into the dense forest. A short while later, he stood atop a tree trunk, gazing off into the distance. Looks like she's deeper in. The sight before him was a tangle of lush foliage and thick vines, the canopies overhead merging into a sea of green so dense it blotted out the sun. Waves of magical beasts still stampeded through the woods, raising dust and ruckus, but compared to the forest's vastness, even they seemed small. This monster forest was unimaginably vast. But, Rovi reasoned, it was only natural for such a place, home to so many monsters, to be enormous. Still, there had to be a limit, and after this long trek, he should be near the heart. Sure enough, the commotion in the woods began to die down. The beast's movement slowed, noticeably. Seeing this, Rovi activated the Gate of Babylon, grabbing an iron chain from a golden ripple, and swung down from the trees toward the center of the monster horde. There he saw, one after another, bestial forms, each one twisted by strange features like bony spikes or wings, each huge and monstrous. They had all stopped, lying prone on the forest floor. Even as Rovi swung past overhead, none of them reacted in the slightest. Rovi's gaze moved forward. At the center of the circle of kneeling monsters, there was a clearing, no trees, no shade. Daylight blazed there, the ground visibly blackened as if scorched, and though there was no crater, it was obvious at a glance this must be where Enkidu had fallen. After all, even a blind man couldn't miss the figure standing there. A woman, draped in a white gown, black hair tumbling down, her skin pale and flawless, a breathtaking beauty. Her exquisitely beautiful face radiated divine light. There was no doubt this was the goddess Aruru, descended in a borrowed form. And beside her lay a mass of clay. Clearly, that was Enkidu, not yet fully formed. At this moment, he did not have that name, but let's call him Enkidu for convenience. Rovi stopped on a tree branch, feet braced against the sturdy trunk, watching Aruru's stunning face, troubled and deep in thought. He knew his hunch was right. Right now, Aruru was struggling with how to shape the perfect body for Enkidu. If Enkidu was to be a weapon made by all the gods to challenge Gilgamesh, of course his appearance couldn't be inferior to the young king of Uruk. Yet Gilgamesh, as a half-divine, half-mortal, possessed an appearance rarely matched even among the gods. Aruru simply couldn't come up with a template that would be his equal. In a way, this entire monster riot had been her doing, hoping to draw inspiration for form from among the soldiers of Uruk. As for how many died in the process, the gods didn't care. To them, everything in the mortal realm existed only to sustain their own existence. Even Gilgamesh, even Enkidu, were nothing more. Of course, goddess or not, Aruru was still troubled. While Rovi was watching her, Aruru seemed to sense it, and lifted her dark green eyes from beneath a curtain of hair, looking straight at him. She tilted her head, ruby lips parting slightly, as if to ask, "Who are you?" As the focal point drawing a legion of monsters, Aruru's every move brought thousands of magical beasts to attention, all raising their heads to gaze at her. A woo! A wolf-like beast let out a low call, a lion monster bared its fangs, a bird of prey flared steel-bright wings in the sun. But for all the red, bestial eyes upon him, they were nothing compared to the goddess's own pure emerald gaze. "Who am I?" Rovi understood the question in her eyes, and smiled. Then, slowly, he shrugged off his robe, baring his long arms, and raised a hand, fingers clenched. He gave the goddess, descended to the mortal realm, a proper welcome. Rovi raised his middle finger, a gesture of utter contempt, even mockery, for a god who treated humans as tools. For a moment, the entire scene froze, as if time itself had ground to a halt. The wolf's jaw hung open, drool dripping and sizzling on the earth, a lion bit its own tongue, blood spraying out, the great bird's wings spread wide and then seized in midair. Even dumbfounded didn't begin to cover it. They weren't human, much less transmigrators, so they didn't know the meaning of Rovi's gesture. But magical beasts, for all their savagery, were beings with keen senses. They could clearly feel intent, be it goodwill or malice. And from that human in the tree, they felt something strange, a mockery. Not malice, but something even more infuriating than malice. So they all froze. After all, even the monsters could sense such naked ridicule. As for Aruru, needless to say, "Oh no, oh no, oh no. Why would you provoke this ancestor? Wouldn't it be better to let her finish her work and go back to heaven in peace?" If they could speak, the monsters would have been cursing him out and tearing Rovi limb from limb right then. They might not be human, but this guy was really something else. But in just a moment, they all went completely still, not daring to make a sound. Because from Aruru's lips, a clear cry rang out, quashing any thought of movement. "Are you mocking me, mortal?" Her voice, which should have been calm, now rang with icy authority like a tranquil stream turned in an instant to a raging flood. The troubled goddess, goaded into anger by this provocation. She was not pleased. Not happy. And what next? Naturally, she'd vent her anger. The logic of a god on high was always simple. She wanted to kill Rovi. But before the goddess could act, the divine clay beside her, made by the god's own power, Enkidu, moved first. He crashed toward Rovi, as if drawn by some strange sense of kinship, placing himself between Rovi and the goddess. "Rovi, who are you? Do we know each other? Don't come any closer." TN, Enkidu, Love. Chapter 16, Fate Ascend 16. 1082 words. The goddess named Aruru was momentarily stunned by what she saw. As the deity entrusted by the gods with shaping Enkidu's final form, Aruru naturally possessed the corresponding power. She was the goddess of creation, a mother goddess among the gods of Mesopotamia. She was especially adept at creating life and giving it appropriate forms. But up until now, no matter what methods she tried, Aruru couldn't get the divine clay, already showing signs of awareness, to react. If not for that, she wouldn't have been so troubled. But now, something she'd failed to do had been accomplished by a human who appeared out of nowhere. The clay surged forward, putting itself between Aruru and Rovi, almost as if it had just met a long-lost relative. After the initial surprise, Aruru looked again at Rovi and instantly understood. "The key of heaven," she murmured, startled. When Rovi heard Aruru's words, he realized the cause of this sudden development. Gilgamesh was the wedge of heaven, maintaining the link between gods and mortals, while Enkidu, created to bind Gilgamesh and steer him onto the right path, was the chains of heaven. Originally, there were only these two. But as it happened, before setting out, Rovi had received the key of heaven from the high priest. A chain and a key naturally shared an innate affinity. In this very moment, the not-yet-shaped Enkidu possessed no wisdom, but instinctively sensed that closeness. Realizing this, Rovi pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling that once again, things were getting out of hand. With a last flicker of hope, he looked toward the mother of creation, who was still standing there. What he got was an enigmatic smile. Aruru suddenly understood everything. As one of the gods, she naturally knew what the key of heaven was. The key of heaven was recognized by the gods. How could someone so recognized possibly be disrespectful toward the gods? That gesture just now hadn't been directed at her, but at the divine clay, feigning disdain, but with deliberate intent. The true purpose was to provoke a reaction from the divine clay. And provoke it, he had. To be rejected by one so close was something the immature chains of heaven simply could not accept. To erase that rejection, the chains of heaven would shape itself in the image of its close one. It would gradually become human. And not just any human, but one perfectly suited to its essence, fully able to bear its power. So, one acknowledged by the gods. "It seems I've misunderstood you." Aruru's expression grew gentle, almost proud. "You truly are remarkable. What are you saying? I understand every word, but why can't I make any sense of the whole sentence?" Rovi looked completely lost. "Then from now on, I'll leave this child to you." Aruru flicked her long, dark hair, her ruby lips curving as she stretched luxuriously in the warm sunlight. Her radiant body shimmered, and in a flash of light, she soared into the sky, vanishing from sight. Rovi didn't even have time to stop her. He could only watch the clearing as the goddess disappeared, leaving behind only scorched earth and lush green all around. The divinity was gone, but her presence lingered. The magical beasts, naturally, remained prone on the ground. Rovi let out a long sigh. He knew for certain that the goddess had misunderstood. She'd thought his earlier mockery was, in fact, intentional benevolence. That was why she'd entrusted Enkidu to him. Why does it always turn out like this? Rovi scratched his head in frustration. Just then, a clear, childlike cry caught his attention. He looked ahead. The divine clay that had just landed in front of him was, just as Aruru had said, changing. Because of Rovi's fleeting disdain, it now felt a powerful sense of dissatisfaction. In this moment, it instinctively responded to the shape within Rovi's heart. It was drawn toward whatever image he held in his mind. The black clay quickly solidified, shedding its original color. Under the dappled sunlight, it gleamed with an ivory sheen. First arms, then legs, then a head. Rovi's eyes went wide, as if watching an invisible hand sculpt a masterpiece before his eyes. A soft sound finally escaped from those newly formed, vividly red lips. The being shaped from clay opened its eyes. It looked just like the Enkidu Rovi remembered from Type Moon. Long, emerald green hair, lush as the forest itself. The delicate face beneath those locks was beautiful and androgynous, the eyes a vibrant, lively green. The features were finely chiseled, lips petal-soft, a slender white neck arching gracefully to a chest that rose and fell ever so slightly. Enkidu's arms spread, limbs slender, though the thighs were just a bit fuller, the legs pressed modestly together, hips curving upward, the waist slender as a vase. Everything exactly as Rovi imagined. The only difference was perhaps a few more feminine features than expected. Rovi fell deep into thought. He admitted, in his mind, Type Moon's Enkidu always felt more feminine. Even though, as a divine weapon, Enkidu technically had no gender. As a divine construct, Enkidu could take any form. But because of Rovi's subconscious, Enkidu's first, most fundamental form appeared just like this before him. Yaya. Like a child learning to speak, Enkidu opened those damp, rosy lips and reached out with both arms, swaying on a branch near where Rovi stood. That exquisitely beautiful face was filled with longing, a craving for closeness. A yearning for intimacy. Rovi finally understood the odd feeling in his heart. In later generations, the epic of the hero King Gilgamesh recorded the story of Enkidu's transformation. Enkidu was born in an ancient, secluded forest. At first, he was formless and innocent. Until one day, a pure, saintly maiden, led by the gods, entered the woods. Enkidu, childlike and naive, was captivated, and spent 7 days and nights with her in the forest. In the end, he awakened to humanity, gained self-awareness, and from then on, walked the earth in the form of that beautiful girl. But now, Enkidu had taken shape. There was no maiden in the forest. The only person here with a direct connection to the divine was Rovi himself. In other words, did I just become the holy maiden? No, the holy man? Rovi pondered, but found no answer. He couldn't make sense of it. But at this moment, he was utterly, thoroughly shocked. TN, Gar, I wish I was that beautiful girl. Chapter 17, Fate Ascend 17. 1036 words. But now that things had come to this, no matter how shocked Rovi felt, he couldn't change the situation. He still didn't really understand how things had gotten so bizarre. Yet, the fact remained, the holy maiden of later epic legend hadn't appeared. Instead, it was because of Rovi that Enkidu had taken on this form. If, in the future, a new epic about Gilgamesh were ever written, wouldn't he end up as that so-called holy maiden? Rovi glanced at Enkidu, whose features now leaned more feminine than masculine, and suddenly thought, maybe this wasn't so bad. No, what was he thinking? He quickly shut down that weird fantasy. Over on the other side, Enkidu was still babbling softly, voice fresh and childlike. The woods were lush around them, but as time passed, the shade stretched and the once blazing sunlight softened, orange-red rays draping over the slender figure like crimson wings. Rovi hesitated for a moment, then swung down on a chain from the gate of Babylon and pulled himself over to Enkidu. He gently slipped off his linen robe, revealing the black clothes he wore beneath, and draped the robe over Enkidu's shoulders. Yaya. A clear voice burst from Enkidu's rosy lips. Enkidu squirmed for a second, then poked a head out from the collar. Wear it properly, Rovi said, sizing up their heights. Enkidu only came up to his shoulder. Well, the petite figure was definitely his fault. Still, hearing Rovi's words, Enkidu stopped fidgeting. Because Enkidu could sense that there was no rejection in Rovi's tone. The newly born, innocent divine construct felt a little at ease. Then Rovi asked, they all obey your orders, right? Enkidu tilted their head, then opened their mouth and sang softly in reply. It was a clear confirmation. Then have them kill me? Rovi asked hopefully. Yaya. Enkidu shook their head with all the certainty of a rattle drum. So much for that. But Rovi wasn't discouraged. After so many failed attempts, what was one more? He prided himself on his patience. Then have them leave, Rovi said, reaching out to gently pat Enkidu's head. And for the next few days, I'll take care of you. He was determined to follow the old legends. To spend 7 days here in the forest with Enkidu. Of course, nothing indecent. But to teach Enkidu about humanity. To share knowledge and train in the ways of battle. If Rovi remembered right. Soon enough, Gilgamesh would sense the presence of the chains of heaven and come here himself. There would be a battle between wedge and chain, an earth-shaking clash. As Gilgamesh's trusted retainer, and now close to Enkidu as well, it made sense for Rovi to try to stop them. And barging in on their fight was perfectly reasonable. But, in terms of sheer power, there was no way he could match Gilgamesh the demigod or Enkidu the divine weapon. To be caught in the crossfire and die there made perfect sense, especially since, after death, he'd ascend to the throne of heroes and could come right back, with no real consequences. It was the perfect plan. Rovi stroked Enkidu's silky green hair, admiring the beauty of the newly born figure, a smile slowly curving his lips. Enkidu seemed to enjoy it too, wearing a faintly blissful expression. "From now on, your name will be Enkidu," he added. "I'll call you En, how about that?" En, Ki. Do. Enkidu moved their lips, struggling a bit with the syllables, but managed to get it right. After all, they were a divine construct. With the right conditions, growth would come quickly. "Let's go." Rovi withdrew his hand and straightened up. Enkidu watched his hand, reluctant to let it go, but didn't say anything more. They tugged at the robe, quickly adjusting to the new clothing. Then, with those vibrant green eyes, Enkidu glanced down, and the monsters scattered at once. In moments, only the endless trees and drifting shadows remained, leaves flickering in the golden light of the distant sunset. "I'll teach you about human knowledge, the things you'll need to survive and live in this world," Rovi continued. "And, of course, I'll teach you how to fight." As he slid down the iron chains from the tree, Rovi spoke, not really caring if Enkidu understood every word. He knew that even if Enkidu couldn't grasp it yet, they'd remember everything and understand it bit by bit. That was how learning worked. Enkidu followed closely behind, hanging on every word, their delicate features intent and earnest. Everything in the world was a curiosity to them. And they especially loved Rovi's voice, his scent, and the feeling of following behind him. A gentle breeze drifted through the woods, tossing little En's lush, soft hair. Through those strands, Enkidu watched Rovi's figure, as if seeing the future and hearing the wind that would one day blow through their own life. The sage lifted the waters of wisdom, and taught the wild child knowledge. Like cleaving chaos at the dawn of time, he brought light into darkness. Those 7 days, friend of the King of Heroes. Enkidu's awakening, the meeting of friends, and a beautiful turning point. The Epic of Gilgamesh. King. In Uruk's palace hall, Sidui, the royal aide, was reviewing stacks of reports when a sudden noise interrupted her. The young, beautiful assistant looked hesitantly at the king, who had abruptly sat up straight. "Did you sense something?" she asked, seeing the faint slit of Gilgamesh's snake-like pupils, and feeling a chill. "Ah! I saw a very interesting mongrel, daring to trespass on my land without my permission." Gilgamesh bared his teeth, an edge of anger in his eyes. "That one hasn't come back yet, right?" "No." Sidui dropped her gaze, as if hiding something, her hands trembling ever so slightly, tired, though she said nothing of it. Sidui knew exactly who Gilgamesh meant, Rovi. The monster riot ended 7 days ago, but since that day, Rovi, your aide, has vanished. At least he's someone I acknowledge. Without my leave, anyone who dares act will face the king's judgment. Gilgamesh shot to his feet. "I leave things here to you. I'm going to meet this god-sent mongrel myself." Chapter 18, Fate Ascend 18. 1124 words. Gilgamesh's anger was plain for all to see. Using his clairvoyance, the power to gaze into the future, he had, at this very moment, seen Enkidu. But in fact, Gilgamesh had been searching for clues to Rovi's whereabouts in the days ahead, using that very ability. After all, Rovi had vanished for 7 days now. 7 days ago, he disappeared into the monster forest to suppress the beast uprising, and despite every search party sent after him, there had been no sign since. Although this guy had openly defied him, Rovi was still his retainer. In Gilgamesh's eyes, no one but himself had the right to judge him. So now, he had to find out where Rovi had gone. If he was alive, bring him back. If he was dead, then those who dared lay a hand on the king's retainer would face royal judgment. But now, Gilgamesh hadn't found Rovi. Instead, at the very place Rovi vanished, he'd found a messenger sent by the gods themselves. What Gilgamesh didn't know was that for these past 7 days, that messenger had been under Rovi's guidance. Nor did he know that Rovi had become the key of heaven, an existence on the same level as, or perhaps even more unique than, the others, making him impossible to find, even with clairvoyance, at such a distance. If Enkidu hadn't recently awakened to the power of the chains of heaven, even he might have remained hidden from Gilgamesh's sight. Clairvoyance wasn't truly omniscience. Not being able to perceive those of equivalent rank was only natural. Even though Rovi had continued to use the Gate of Babylon given to him, he'd only used it as a tool for travel, never actually drawing upon its treasures. So Gilgamesh remained unaware. With his antipathy toward the gods, he never considered any of this. His first thought was that the gods had finally dealt with Rovi, the one who'd interrupted the great ritual, punishing him for his blasphemy. They'd erased him, wiped his existence from this world. Now, even the future could not reveal him. In that case, the king's wrath would blaze forth. Western Uruk. On the outer edge of the monster forest, the blue sky hung like a vast curtain over the empty plains, the dense forest rimmed with walls and ever-watchful guards. Since Rovi had ventured deep into the woods, the beasts had caused no more trouble. But the duty of a border guard was to prevent disaster before it began. So, for these 7 days, apart from sending men into the forest to look for Rovi, all defenses remained at full alert, if anything, stricter than ever. At that moment, a soldier on the wall seemed to sense something, suddenly lifting his head. He saw a star chariot. Green wings, golden main body, a relic of the age of the gods, powered by a core of immense magical energy, streaking across the sky. It was unmistakable. In Uruk, no one could fail to recognize the king's favored chariot, his star vessel. And its appearance could only mean one thing. The king. The guard called out in shock, but before he could react further, the star chariot streaked across the sky in a burning arc and plunged deep into the forest, vanishing from view. The commotion the star chariot caused among the border guards could wait. At that very moment, Gilgamesh himself sat upon a throne of blazing gold, his fingers drumming the armrest. In both dress and expression, he was not as he usually appeared. His golden hair, normally falling loose, was now swept back, his brow reflecting a sharpened kingly aura. He wore golden armor, thick, brilliant, godlike. This was Gilgamesh's battle attire. It was the garb he donned to render judgment as king upon those who dared provoke him. Fingers drumming, the king's star chariot roared through the forest, finally coming to a halt, suspended high above the trees. He had arrived. This was the place he had seen. And so, to think you could stand in the presence of this glorious king and still believe you could hide in the filth like a rat, are you one of those wretches sent by the decrepit gods? The king's cold voice thundered down from above. Come out, mongrel. Deep in the forest, someone heard the call and looked up, emerald eyes filled with confusion. Hadn't Rovi gone to fetch water? Why hadn't he come back yet? What was that? From beneath a curtain of green hair, those eyes widened. The person in the forest spotted the golden-green brilliance hovering overhead, a sight never before seen, and was left dazed. Enkidu wondered. Finally showing yourself, are you? You gutter-born mongrel. Gilgamesh had spotted them as well. Draped in a loose, white priest's robe, green hair flowing, a slender and strikingly beautiful girl. He took in the figure, sensed the divine energy, and saw that the robe belonged to Rovi. In that instant, Gilgamesh's killing intent blazed even brighter. Crimson-slitted eyes went cold as ancient stone, like the unmelting ice of the underworld. A serpent's tongue tasted the king's wrath. Faced with such undisguised malice, Enkidu frowned, delicate brows creasing. After 7 days, they were no longer the innocent blank slate they had been. In self-awareness and intelligence, they were now the equal of any human. They didn't know who this was, or what he wanted. But Enkidu understood one thing. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If attacked, Enkidu would, just as Rovi had taught, strike back even harder, though the power this stranger wielded felt similar to Rovi's. He was not as close, not as warm. So Enkidu felt no hesitation. Not only do you refuse to surrender, you'd even defy the king's judgment. Gilgamesh slowly rose from his throne, then, prepare to bear the punishment for angering me, your king. Golden light shimmered, rippling outward. The gate of Babylon opened, and a shining, razor-sharp divine sword fell into Gilgamesh's hand. He gripped it tightly, one of the rarest treasures in his collection. The white robe billowed, Enkidu stood silently among the trees, shadows flowing over their form like waves, lifting dust into the air. Though neither had yet moved, the vast magical energy rolling off each of them collided in an instant like two floods clashing together. The ground of the ancient forest trembled, the nearby river quivered with ripples. At the water's edge, Rovi stared at the spreading rings in the river, startled. He stood, glanced over his shoulder, and spotted the scene from miles away. Gilgamesh is here. His heart leapt. Gilgamesh had come. And he'd already found Enkidu. They were fighting. With a clatter, as if he'd been expecting this all along, Rovi dropped his clay water bowl and sprinted toward the battlefield. TN, quick. Die. Chapter 19, Fate Ascend 19. 1,146 words. Rovi had already rehearsed this scene in his mind countless times. It might sound a little callous, but ever since meeting Enkidu, he'd been quietly looking forward to this very moment. As a transmigrator, he knew this confrontation was inevitable. The wedge of heaven and the chains of heaven were destined to meet. And he was long since prepared to throw himself into their clash. Rovi gripped the iron chains summoned from the gate of Babylon, swinging through the forest with even greater speed and precision than before, darting through the trees like a streak of lightning. The battle between Gilgamesh and Enkidu had already begun. The closer he got, the more intensely he could feel the power radiating from the King of Heroes and the divine weapon in human form. The ground shook, dust filled the air. From afar, the world seemed swallowed by a storm of gold and green. Rovi inhaled, exhaled. HMPH, ha ha ha. Even if you're just a mongrel, to possess the power to stand against this great king is truly rare. The arrogant laugh of Uruk's ruler rang through the forest ahead. But you've committed a crime so grave, not even my boundless kingly heart can forgive you, artificial weapon. Right here, right now, meet your end. Gilgamesh, clad in golden armor, stood tall atop Vimana, looking down with scarlet eyes at the green-haired girl below. Behind the king, golden ripples billowed out in layers. The gate of Babylon was thrown wide open, hundreds of swords bristling from within like a suspended steel forest, all pointed toward the earth, toward Enkidu, who commanded the very soil to rise up as countless blades. Both unleashed their arsenals in a storm of blades from afar. In some ways, Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought in much the same style, and their power was evenly matched. So the King of Heroes didn't hesitate to offer praise. Those crimson eyes glinted with genuine admiration. Though he was furious at the presumed death of his retainer, after clashing with this divine messenger in the form of a green-haired girl, Gilgamesh understood this being was simply a weapon crafted by the gods. Weapons don't kill. It's those who wield them that do. So from the start, the king's true grudge was with the gods themselves. But that didn't mean he would let this clay doll go. Only by shattering it here could he show the gods his will and the inviolable dignity of the king of Uruk. Yes, at this moment. Even the gods were watching this fight. The battle between the wedge and chains of heaven. As the ones who forged the chains, of course the gods cared whether it could fulfill its mission to correct the wedge. Rovi paused on a bush, looking up. High above the world, the gods' shining eyes gazed down. Thanks to his connection as a priest, his touch with the root Rovi could clearly sense their presence. It was truly a grand spectacle. But what if someone interrupted it? Rovi was a little excited to find out. You're powerful too. But until I meet my friend, I won't fall here. Hidden beneath the forest's shade, Enkidu replied, those emerald eyes shining with determination. She leaned forward, placing her pale hand against the earth. The soil surged upward. As the creation of the goddess Aruru, Enkidu, like her divine mother, possessed formidable powers of creation. She could turn simple earth into divine weaponry, no less fearsome than the blades of Gilgamesh's treasury. And unlike Gilgamesh, Enkidu's supply was endless. So long as she stood on the land, her energy could never be depleted. Of course, neither Gilgamesh nor Enkidu had yet reached the full extent of their powers as Rovi remembered them. Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon was only half complete. He still lacked the primordial divine artifact that was truly his. Enkidu too had yet to fully manifest her chains as the chains of heaven. But even so, their power was already godlike. Now, both readied their strongest, deciding strike. A verdant forest below. A steel jungle above. From afar, the converging points of blade and chain looked like the jaws of a great beast, slowly closing to swallow the world. Gilgamesh stood tall on the chariot, arms crossed. Enkidu's white robe fluttered, her beautiful features tight with resolve. Who would win? Who would lose? Neither knew. Nor did the gods, watching from afar, know which was stronger, the wedge or the chains of heaven. And just then, at the edge of the field, Rovi finally moved. He grasped the dangling iron chain of the gate of Babylon overhead, and swung himself straight toward the very center of the clash, the point where the jaws would meet. Stop! Both of you! All the pent-up emotion burst out as Rovi shouted, his young, handsome face twisted in panic. Rovi! Enkidu looked up, stunned as he suddenly burst into the center of the field. He's alive! Gilgamesh also froze, surprised. At first there was relief. Then, his expression grew even more serious. Rovi's appearance proved he wasn't dead. But that was a moment ago. Now, both Enkidu and Gilgamesh had thrown everything into this clash. It's easy to attack. But to pull back, nearly impossible. A fist, maybe, can be withdrawn, but once an arrow is loosed, who can take it back? The power of the wedge and the chains of heaven far surpassed any arrow. Mongrel, get out of the way, Gilgamesh roared, crimson eyes narrowing, serpentine shadows flickering. Rovi, get down, Enkidu shouted too. Both strained to rein in the power they'd unleashed. But it was clearly a hopeless effort. The collision pressed on, wild energy roaring like a beast tearing the world apart. Is that the key of heaven we gods approved? Why is he so reckless? A rare piece. Shame, he's still too weak. He can't withstand this impact. Must we abandon him here? Maybe his death could awaken the wedge of heaven? The voices of the gods drifted to Rovi's ears on the wind. Apparently, they didn't know he could hear them, so their words were utterly unfiltered. Indifferent, lofty malice. But Rovi didn't care about them now. He'd settle those accounts in the future. There'd be time enough for revenge. Right now, he hung suspended in midair, bracing himself against the pressure from above and below, his face set in grim determination, as if prepared to die to stop those he cared about from destroying each other. Rovi spread his arms wide, as if to embrace the world. And in that moment, unnoticed by all, a radiant smile broke across his face. It was here, so close now. His time of death was near. Rovi was certain that in future ages, someone would record this moment. How someone once faced a force that could swallow all the mountains and seas, and though doomed to die 1,000 deaths, had no regrets. TN, Yay. Chapter 20, Fate Ascend 20. 1,272 words. A voiceless roar echoed in Rovi's heart, echoing that longing he'd carried all along. To live with glory, to die with honor. To be a hero, not a clown. Damn it, you reckless bastard. Gilgamesh spat between clenched teeth, veins bulging on his forehead. Rovi. Even Enkidu's delicate features were flushed with strain. Both of them pulled with all their strength, but it was useless. All they could do was watch as that earth-shattering force, the jaws of heaven and earth, closed in on Rovi at the center. The gods watching from on high could not understand, was Rovi not afraid to die? How could he face this so willingly? It was at this instant, just as everything closed in, that a formless vibration rang out. BZZZT. An intense hum shimmered into being as a stream of light burst from Rovi's body. It was as if a kettle under immense pressure had finally burst open, rays of light poured from every pore beneath his black uniform, flooding outward. In the end, it all condensed into a single, golden, radiant key. The key of heaven. The divine artifact bestowed by the gods, always hidden within him, now manifested as a shadow in the air. Rovi froze, and so did the gods. This thing. Had this function? In these 7 days, Rovi had studied this divine relic capable of opening the boundary between gods and men inside and out. But he'd never discovered it could do this. Yet Rovi soon realized, the key still didn't have any defensive abilities. That glow merely relaxed every muscle in his body, releasing him from the crushing pressure. It allowed him to adapt to any environment, to move freely in any setting, unaffected by restrictions. Exactly as he'd understood the key of heaven's power. But it only let him adapt, it couldn't block the real damage about to hit him. Damn it, he was still going to die. He let out a breath, half in resignation. Then he noticed a black mark on the key. Dirty. No, impossible, the key of heaven was a perfect divine artifact, created by all the gods. It couldn't be defiled. Wait, was that a crack? The key of heaven was breaking. Cracks began to spread from a single point, branching into countless black fissures, until the golden key's image shattered, vanishing in a cloud of gold dust. Rovi barely had time to process it before a surge of unknown power erupted from deep inside him. It felt like high-octane fuel had been pumped straight into his engine. He instinctively reached out, braced his feet, and let that wild energy guide him. Boom. Above and below, he blocked them both. Just like the first god splitting the world, he braced one hand against the sky, 1 foot on the earth. The golden power of the king fell from above, stopped cold in Rovi's upraised hand. From below, the blades of earth surged up, only to be pressed down by his feet, unable to rise any further. Alone, with nothing but his own body, he divided the battlefield between heaven and earth. Every motion, every breath, felt like the opening of a new world. There's that much power in his body. Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes, a smile flickering on his lips. Rovi. I knew it. You really are the strongest. Enkidu was visibly excited. The subtle murmurs of the gods filtered into Rovi's priestly ears. So that's it. He used the force of the lock and the wedge to shatter the key inside himself, and then turned that power into something truly his own. The key of heaven is the same rank as the lock and wedge, only this could work. No wonder he's so fearless. Such wisdom, such courage. We weren't wrong, he really is the perfect pawn. A pawn who can perfectly counter the wedge of heaven. No, you're wrong. Rovi's face was blank. He'd never imagined things would turn out like this. Whatever. Guess this is just his luck. Shaking his head, helpless, Rovi still accepted reality in an instant. The power from the shattered key was surging through him now, and he knew no matter what, not even the lock and wedge could hurt or kill him anymore. Just like Gilgamesh and Enkidu. With the key's power fused into him, Rovi was no longer the holder of the key of heaven. He was the key itself. Not even the gods could reclaim it now. And its ability was no longer just adaptation. It had become open and close. Everything in the world was now like a door before him. Once closed, it would form a nearly impenetrable barrier, able to block most attacks beneath or even equal to the rank of the key. Right now, it had activated on its own. Rovi still couldn't control it well, he couldn't close it at will yet. So, no use fretting, no use regretting. Rovi spread his arms wide. He knew he couldn't die now, sooner or later, the chance would come. Since there was no way to settle scores later, he might as well try something now. Go all in. Court death on a grand scale, he released all the power surging inside him. Dazzling ripples shimmered and danced, finally condensing into a wash of silver-white light. Drawing on the power of the lock and wedge. Calling out for their help. Seeing Rovi's desperate bid to stop their battle, both Enkidu and Gilgamesh now understood it was all a misunderstanding, they weren't enemies. So now, when Rovi called for their aid, of course they didn't refuse. Rovi, whatever you want to do, I'll always be at your side. Enkidu lowered her eyes, and in the same moment, brought her own power to its peak. She didn't know what Rovi was planning. But the trust born from 7 days together was absolute. Oh, interesting. Gilgamesh paused. The king atop Vimana watched the glow around Rovi. He sensed a mysterious resonance in it. Of the same origin. The same essence. A connection between the wedge and the key. He couldn't reason out the cause, but with the highest rank clairvoyance, Gilgamesh could faintly glimpse Rovi's purpose. So he threw back his head and laughed. Mitch, ha ha ha. Even a barking cur can show such resolve. Very well, then, how interesting. Then, in honor of such wild ambition, I'll answer your call with that. He too spread his arms wide. Look to the sky, break through the boundaries. Of course. Rovi closed his eyes, then opened them. His pupils became the shape of a key, his whole body whipped up a roaring torrent. The powers of the wedge and the lock of heaven converged within him, swirling like a triple helix, sweeping out in all directions. What is he doing? All three pawns working together. That's some power. As expected of a tool of our making. If we use him well, our rule over humanity's faith will endure for ages yet. The gods were still watching. But at this moment, they hadn't realized, as Gilgamesh had, that Rovi's aim was simple. He would take the wedge as the road, the lock as the guide, and himself as the key, fusing all three, to break past every boundary. With this, he would send a roar up to the heavens, shaking the gods on high who watched him from above. This time, it wasn't because he wanted to die. It was because those gods had treated them all as tools for their own rule. Always calling them pawns. Well, now he would answer that malice in kind. He'd tell them, "To hell with your pawn. We are human beings. Living, breathing people. I want Enkidu and Gil inside of me." Chapter 21, Fate Ascend 21. 1188 words. In the end, although Rovi did not harbor hostility toward the gods above as Gilgamesh did, the fact remained that he felt no reverence toward them. As someone transmigrated from the modern world, it was difficult for Rovi to genuinely believe in these so-called gods. The reason he became a priest of the gods was purely to get close to Gilgamesh. The reason he accepted the key of heaven was so that he wouldn't be constrained by the environment, seizing every chance to court death. Indeed, in some ways, it was precisely because he distrusted the gods that he willingly accepted the key. He wished dearly that the gods would concoct some sinister scheme against him. However, this never meant Rovi would meekly accept the gods arrogantly dictating his future. Mortals derive their dignity from the self. And from the self springs the highest dignity, freedom. In the monster forest west of Uruk, the land already thrown into turmoil from Gilgamesh and Enkidu's earlier battle now showcased an even more stunning and terrifying sight. Enkidu, fully unleashing his true nature, no longer took the form of a divine weapon mold from endless clay. His entire figure vanished, replaced by a gigantic silver-white chain bursting from the earth and piercing straight through the sky. Golden brilliance rippled layer by layer from the gate of Babylon, enveloping the chain. The power of Gilgamesh, the wedge of heaven, formed a channel linking heaven and earth. And Rovi held both the wedge of heaven and the chains of heaven. His body hovered at the center, gazing upward toward the faintly visible eyes of the gods above the firmament. From afar, he resembled a magnificent flower blooming from below. The great chain served as the stem, the rippling gates as the leaves, and the suspended key, the flower's heart. Beautiful, resplendent, and majestic. What is he doing? What are they attempting? Using the wedge as a pathway, the chains as guidance, and the key as the gateway. Are they planning to shake the heavens themselves? Insolence. A deafening roar, fury from the gods accompanied by lightning that split heaven and earth, erupting in an instant. The gods finally realized Rovi's intentions, and naturally, their reaction was outrage. The fury of gods offended by mere mortals made manifest. The gods were embodiments of nature, their wrath alone could alter the world's fabric. But even thunder and storm could not halt Rovi's actions. He thrust the chains of heaven further upward. Ha ha ha! You rotten, worthless fools. Seated upon his throne to one side, Gilgamesh's laughter grew ever more delighted. A bunch of mongrels who only know how to throw tantrums from behind layers of curtains. Your king stands right here. If you're so bold, descend and fight me yourselves. The gods. This guy really deserved a beating. They wanted nothing more than to strike him down, but how, when they couldn't descend? Helpless rage. Rovi glanced toward the cackling king of heroes, unable to suppress his own laughter. Utterly unrestrained. Exactly, this feeling was precisely what he wanted. Rumble, 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 the thunder grew increasingly frantic, clearly marking the gods' intensifying fury. At this very moment, Rovi firmly grasped the chains of heaven formed from Enkidu, and then he thrust upward. Boom, lightning shattered like fireworks, storms and clouds scattered like mere dust before him. As though wielding a spear, Rovi pierced the heavens, striking directly at the eyes of the gods. Curses, curses, curses. How dare they, how could this mortal dare? Our final eyes remaining in the mortal realm must not be destroyed. At this instant, the gods felt fear. Unable now to descend in their true forms, if their eyes were blinded, they would lose even their ability to observe the mortal world, let alone interfere. Not every god had a vessel suited to incarnation. Such vessels were exceedingly rare. Thus, their fear was unavoidable. The sky trembled violently under the shaking chains. Not only the monster forest but the very earth beneath their feet, and even the heavens above their heads, began to quake. The boundaries between heaven, earth, and humanity wavered under the combined force of the key, wedge, and chains of heaven. We must retreat for now. They cannot truly threaten the realm where our true selves reside. Withdraw, withdraw. The gods finally resolved themselves. Swiftly, the eye above disappeared, retreating from the mortal plane. Rovi was unsurprised. He had never genuinely planned to drag down the heavens and throw the gods into the dirt. Shaking heaven's foundations a little was already enough. The wedge, key, and chains of heaven held immense power, but the trio hadn't yet brought it to full potential. This move simply underscored Rovi's resolve. More importantly, it was designed specifically to provoke the gods, to shift their hostility onto himself. From this day forward, the gods' primary hatred would target him. He had once been their priest, yet now, he rebelled openly. The gods would certainly loathe him down to their bones. Naturally, Rovi would become their primary target. With this, perhaps Enkidu and Gilgamesh's fate will finally change. In the original epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu met his end precisely due to a curse from the gods. Rovi hoped they'd inflict the same fate upon himself. Hopefully, those gods will put some effort into it. But what Rovi didn't notice, or rather, simply didn't care about, was that in this violent upheaval, the mortal realm and heavens weren't the only ones affected. The underworld trembled as well. A sound. From the surface? How long has it been? A barren wasteland, dark, frozen, and utterly devoid of life. Only a few ghostly blue flames floated quietly through the air. A shadow slowly opened a pair of brilliant ruby-red eyes. Golden hair cascaded down loosely, scattering gently with her movements. How long had it been since she'd heard a sound? Too long, far too long, ever since the land belonging to the gods vanished entirely from the mortal plane. The goddess of the netherworld raised her head. She saw a small crack, a faint glow, appearing in the previously impenetrable ceiling connecting the underworld and the mortal realm. Is this not a dream? In a soft murmur, the goddess wept, overcome by emotion at seeing the first glimpse of light after endless solitude. She was in the deepest recesses of the netherworld. Above her, in the layer closer to humanity, another figure stood tall, leaning upon a great sword. The vast heavens and earth quake, endless realms tremble, the gods are angered by their irreverence and shaken by their audacity, yet they are powerless. For this land no longer belongs to them. Their era has long since passed. The gods withdraw, their authority shaken. The original trio. Heroes who shake even the heavens themselves. To think that I, who have walked countless eons, could witness this moment. I, Zeusudra, am truly honored. Zeusudra, an ancient immortal of Mesopotamia, a dweller of the underworld. Also known as. With a resounding clang, the figure pulled free his massive sword, stepping into the ghostly blue flames. Armor rattled and scraped as he moved forward, toward the light, toward the mortal realm. Chapter 22, Fate Ascend 22. 1164 words. Ha ha ha. Even this king can't help feeling exhilarated. Gilgamesh's booming laughter echoed throughout Uruk's grand royal hall. Seated majestically on his throne, his scarlet eyes brimmed with amusement as he looked down upon the two figures occupying newly arranged seats before him. Naturally, after chasing away the god's eye from the monster forest, Gilgamesh had used a transport artifact from his gate of Babylon to swiftly return Rovi and Enkidu to the palace. Realizing it had all been a misunderstanding, he certainly wouldn't pursue further action against Enkidu. He had stormed off furiously, but returned in high spirits. In recognition of your splendid performance, This king graciously forgives your insolent concealment of your whereabouts, your blatant disrespect, and your attempt to harm this king, all grave crime. I even generously grant you both the honor of seats placed before my throne. Rejoice and offer gratitude for this king's boundless magnanimity. It had only been 7 days, but this guy still hadn't learned to speak normally. Rovi, seated before the throne, shook his head and was immediately met with a pair of puzzled emerald green eyes. Don't mind him. That's just how he is, Rovi explained gently. Little Enkidu nodded obediently. If Rovi says so, it must be true. Over the past 7 days, Rovi had taught Enkidu everything he knew. Unfortunately, the unintended consequence was that the child had grown overwhelmingly dependent on him. It had been fine when he wasn't around. But now, with him here, En obediently hung onto his every word. Did I somehow, accidentally spoil a legendary hero? Rovi rubbed his temples, deciding to say no more. Aside from Gilgamesh himself, not much had changed in the palace after a few days away. The hall remained vast and imposing, golden pillars holding aloft a dome that seemed to touch the heavens. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, rippling gently. Atop 99 towering steps, the throne still faced the grand entrance from afar. The only new addition, perhaps, were the seats prepared beside the throne for himself and Enkidu. Yet, he felt something was missing. Speaking of which, where's Vizier Sidui? That was it, he finally realized who was absent. Sidui, Gilgamesh's diligent advisor, usually spent more time in this hall than even the king himself. Yet now, she was nowhere to be found. Sidui, Chemph. That woman foolishly thought she could deceive my eyes, unaware that this king's brilliance sees through all, especially her fragile condition. As punishment for attempting to hide her weakness from me, I've forbidden her from entering the palace for 3 days. Gilgamesh waved dismissively. In other words, Sidui had overworked herself to exhaustion. And Gilgamesh had forcibly ordered her to rest. If you're worried about someone, just say it normally, Rovi sighed, spreading his hands. I've told you before, men acting tsunder are disgusting. It seems your mongrel habit of barking hasn't changed one bit. Gilgamesh sneered. Moron. Rovi rolled his eyes. Gilgamesh snapped furiously. You insolent cur, idiot. Dumbass. Disrespectful wretch. Imbecile. See. You can't even insult someone properly, let alone hold a normal conversation. Rovi finally chuckled, rising from his seat. If you care about someone, just be straightforward. Sidui isn't like you. Chemph. Does this king need your lecturing? Gilgamesh folded his arms defiantly, turning his head away. Why is he acting like a spoiled child? Rovi smiled helplessly. I'm exhausted after these past few days, so I'll head back and rest now. He had barely taken a step when little Enkidu instantly sprang from his seat, bounding over to catch up. Wait for me, Rovi. Great, another kid tagging along. Watching the two descend the steps and leave the throne room, Gilgamesh fell silent for a moment, closing his eyes briefly in thought. Is Sidui truly that different from me? Rovi didn't need to spell it out. Sidui had been entrusted to him by his father. She'd stayed faithfully by his side throughout the 10 years since he'd ascended to the throne. Gilgamesh had long since grown used to her presence. But just now, when he'd arrived at the hall ahead of Rovi and Enkidu and noticed the exhaustion Sidui could no longer hide, he'd suddenly realized something crucial. No matter how competent, Sidui was still mortal. Different from them. Change my way of speaking? Ha ha ha, what nonsense. That fool underestimates me, and he underestimates her too. Gilgamesh laughed heartily. If I changed, I wouldn't be myself anymore, and Sidui herself would probably be disappointed. I hope you truly can stand alongside this king when that day arrives. Rovi. The king's silhouette slowly vanished from the throne. He had entered his treasury. The great hall gradually fell silent. Rovi had left the palace. As Gilgamesh's nominal advisor, he naturally couldn't live in the temple anymore, instead taking up residence in a quiet courtyard not far from the palace. Enkidu currently had nowhere else to go. It seemed impossible to arrange for him to stay anywhere else, anyway. After taking Enkidu there, however, Rovi decided to head back out again. Rovi, where are we going? Rovi, are these the houses and palaces you mentioned? Rovi, something smells delicious, it seems much better than what you cook. I know my cooking sucks, no need to rub it in. Rovi felt a mild headache creeping in. He truly felt like he was babysitting now. He glanced at the lively streets of Uruk, bustling with activity even in the late afternoon. Compared to later eras, Uruk's commerce was highly developed, and with the backdrop of the Age of Gods, the scene possessed a bustling atmosphere impossible for future historians to fully imagine. Rovi took a skewer of grilled meat from a street vendor and handed it to Enkidu. Seeing the curiosity in the youth's delicate features, he couldn't help smiling. Eat up, he urged gently. Then we'll go back and rest. He suspected the coming days wouldn't be peaceful. Taking a bite himself, Rovi savored the tender meat and its flavorful juices. No matter what, food was always one of life's pleasures. This was exactly why he'd stepped out. After days of tastelessness in the forest, he'd begun to fear he'd lost his sense of taste. It's delicious, little Enkidu said, looking up with a bright smile, traces of meat juice still glistening on his rosy lips. But I still prefer your cooking, Rovi. It has your scent. The divine construct's eyes held nothing but sincerity. Rovi swallowed his mouthful, intending to respond, but suddenly paused, sensing something strange. A lingering divine presence hung faintly in the city air. It resonated with him, clearly extending an invitation. Go back to the courtyard first, I have something I need to take care of. I'll return quickly. All right. En obediently nodded, always following Rovi's words to the letter. With Enkidu's strength, Rovi had no cause for concern. Turning swiftly, Rovi headed away. He already had a good guess as to who was calling him. That goddess. What is Ishtar up to this time? Chapter 23, Fate Ascend 23. 1,253 words. Rovi turned a corner, threading through streets bathed in alternating sunlight and shadow, until he finally found the source of the presence he'd sensed waiting quietly in the shade. I thought you'd lost the nerve to show up. At the center of a narrow alley flanked by tall buildings, a crisp voice echoed gently. The figure had her back to him, long black hair shifting softly as she turned, her fair, athletic body gleaming like ivory in the dimness. Exactly as Rovi had anticipated. So it really was you. Ishtar. Indeed, it is I, the great goddess herself. Ishtar flicked her hair elegantly, her face completely at ease, as though last time's humiliation never happened. She wore a seemingly refined smile on her delicate features, exuding an unexpected intellectual charm that sharply contrasted with her previously arrogant attitude. She waited with anticipation for Rovi's reaction. Ever since her last defeat, she'd gradually integrated more of her host's humanity, slowly grasping the concept humans called inner beauty. Simply put, she had learned to be gentle. Gentle women were always popular, surely Rovi wouldn't be any different. Ishtar subtly lifted her eyes, gazing at him expectantly. Yet the look on his face clearly said, "Kiddo, you disappoint me. What kind of reaction is that?" Ishtar's carefully maintained elegance nearly shattered on the spot. Unbeknownst to her, Rovi truly was disappointed. He had assumed this invitation was revenge, perhaps even an attempt on his life. Otherwise, why would he have come here with such eager anticipation? He'd even deliberately sent Enkidu away. Wasn't it exactly for this? And this was it. If there's nothing important, I'm going back. Rovi shrugged indifferently, yawning lazily, not even sparing Ishtar another glance. Feigning disinterest. For gods, that was even more humiliating than direct insults. Sure enough, seeing Rovi's dismissive attitude, Ishtar quickly steadied herself. The goddess took a deep breath, her bare chest rising and falling rhythmically. No, I can't let him escape like this. Otherwise, her efforts over these past 7 days would have been completely wasted. Rovi dusted off his hands casually, making a show of turning to leave. Immediately, he heard Ishtar approach, her graceful steps echoing softly as she came closer, hips swaying gently with every movement. Only about 5 meters away now. Finally making her move. Rovi couldn't suppress a faint spark of anticipation. But instead, Ishtar simply spoke, flashing him a charming, cute smile. "Become my lover, Rovi-san?" Rovi's face instantly twisted into confusion. Is this some kind of joke? Are we even that familiar? Wait. Was she trying to use the same trick she tried on Gilgamesh, only now directed at him? Recalling her parting words after their last encounter in the royal palace, Rovi suddenly understood. However, for Ishtar to speak like this now also meant that she hadn't communicated with the heavens recently. Otherwise, she surely would have known about his recent transgression against the gods. If she had, she'd either never dare meet him alone, or she'd be trying to kill him the instant they met. What a pity. You don't have to answer me right away, Ishtar continued, noticing Rovi's thoughtful silence. She crossed her arms beneath her chest, pressing them slightly as if trying to emphasize something, but quickly realized the futility and gave up in mild frustration. Instead, she lifted one slender, jade-white finger, which stood out clearly in the shadows of the alley. She murmured softly, "I know exactly what you're thinking." As she spoke, the goddess moved 2 steps closer, further reducing the distance between them. An intoxicating fragrance gently brushed Rovi's senses, and he froze momentarily as the graceful goddess leaned even closer, placing her face mere inches from his own. Despite his earlier insults, Rovi never once underestimated Ishtar's current beauty. After all, her host was a heroine featured prominently in Type Moon's own works. Perhaps not the pinnacle of beauty, but certainly enchanting nonetheless. Even more so now, with their closeness creating an undeniably ambiguous atmosphere. This was something the prideful goddess from before would never have done. She who viewed all mortals as mere playthings would never willingly approach a human so intimately. Not even Gilgamesh. Yet 7 days of merging her humanity and divinity, mixed with her pride and stubbornness as a goddess of beauty, had led her to this very moment. Rovi appeared momentarily dazed. Ishtar raised her lovely face, her cheeks flushed as she parted her rosy lips. "See? My heart's beating so fast right now." She gently leaned in, whispering sweetly beside Rovi's ear, her voice deliberately seductive, a faintly victorious smile forming on her lips. According to her meticulous research on human emotions these past few days, such a gesture was irresistible. No mortal man could possibly withstand this temptation. So, she was utterly confident and even praised herself inwardly for her cleverness and flawless acting. Although, deep down, her heart truly was racing rapidly. But it was just an act, after all. An accelerated heartbeat isn't normal. "It's an illness, you should see a doctor," Rovi said with a completely serious expression, placing his hands firmly on Ishtar's slender bare shoulders and pushing her gently away from his ear to face her squarely. Ishtar blinked, dumbfounded. This guy. Why didn't he react? Of course Rovi wouldn't react. It wasn't because he lacked human desires, but because... "Lady Ishtar, did you forget to set up a spell to repel ordinary people?" Rovi calmly raised his other hand, pointing behind her. Ishtar's body stiffened slightly. She sensed what he meant, yet didn't dare look behind. Because... what are they doing in public? No idea. "Ah, young love. Must be nice to be young." Whispers from behind reached her ears. With such an audience, who could possibly continue confidently? Ishtar's blush deepened immediately, her face practically burning. Ah. Embarrassing, embarrassing, embarrassing. Too embarrassing. A dignified goddess being watched like street entertainment. A gentle breeze blew past. In an instant, everyone vanished. Rovi paused slightly, noticing Ishtar's raised hand and a faint glow at her palm. Instinctively, Rovi moved to stop her. Even though he wished for his own demise, he couldn't simply watch fellow humans be slaughtered. Yet unexpectedly, Ishtar didn't kill anyone, she merely erased the bystanders' memories with divine power, gently sending them away. This wasn't typical of the goddess of Venus. "So that's why you felt strange earlier," Rovi suddenly realized, astonished. "You've fused with your vessel's humanity, haven't you? Such inexplicable shyness. Such catastrophic failures at critical moments." This undoubtedly was Rin Tosaka's influence. He'd sensed this familiar feeling from the start, deliberately allowing the onlookers to gather. Rin Tosaka might slip up, but he certainly wouldn't. Those ordinary people couldn't have hidden themselves from him, especially now that he embodied the key of heaven itself. And as expected, Ishtar hadn't harmed these mortals she previously saw as mere toys. This kind of genuine kindness was utterly alien to her original divine self. Face still flushed, Ishtar turned her head aside, appearing distinctly unnatural from embarrassment. I've made myself clear already. Bibi my lover, damn it. Though she couldn't suppress her embarrassment, her pride as a goddess forced her to continue. Rovi had to admit, this version of Ishtar was indeed much cuter than before. His expression softened into sincere interest, causing even Ishtar, who thought her plan had failed, to regain a glimmer of hope. And then, but, I refuse. Are you fucking kidding me right now? TN, are you fucking kidding me right now? Chapter 24, Fate Ascend 24. 1,260 words. The faint glimmer of hope that had just ignited was instantly extinguished. Ishtar's lovely face twisted in frustration again. Anger, embarrassment, and indignation, emotions utterly alien to her, surged chaotically through her heart. Truthfully, for a being like Ishtar, this experience was unprecedented. The gods of Mesopotamia were manifestations of natural phenomena. At their core, they were indifferent planetary existences, granted only superficial intelligence by mortal worship. Yet beneath this superficial veneer lay their true nature, cold and detached. That coldness was precisely what humans called divinity. But right now, Ishtar was genuinely experiencing emotional turmoil. This feeling. It's so shameful, damn it. Watching the goddess's face contort into something reminiscent of Munch the Scream, Rovi pressed his palm to his forehead. Then, to his surprise, Ishtar suddenly calmed herself down. No, wait. She seemed to realize something, pounding her left palm decisively with her right fist. A look of sudden enlightenment spread across her face. You're just being contrary on purpose, aren't you? I've heard humans do that a lot. They pretend to dislike something precisely because they care too much. Oh ho tilde. I never imagined you'd be the Tsunda type tilde. Ishtar covered her mouth with her hand, revealing an oddly smug grin, accompanied by a strange giggle. She looked exactly like some sinister old witch. Rovi. He knew that Ishtar, who believed she'd already mastered human nature, would absolutely refuse to acknowledge her own defeat. And admittedly, the goddess desperately finding excuses to justify her failures was indeed very human. It made her oddly lively and charming. But since she obviously had no intention of killing him, there was no point in Rovi continuing this game any longer. It seemed he'd have to return home disappointed. Tilde. Why so quiet now? Did I hit the nail on the head? Ishtar was clearly growing more confident, as if victory was already firmly in her grasp. I knew it. I'm the goddess of Venus, after all. Not to mention I have a sister who rules over the underworld. Matters of the heart are nothing to me. She proudly listed off her supposed glories. Rovi, who had just taken a step away, abruptly halted, his gaze sharply turning toward her. Ishtar was still laughing smugly, but under his intense stare, her confidence slowly crumbled into nervousness. Her expression stiffened, and her smile gradually turned into an awkward twitch. What are you looking at, you rude mortal? She asked, cheeks turning faintly pink again. You just mentioned the goddess of the underworld, didn't you? Rovi's voice was deep and serious. So what? Ishtar struggled against her embarrassment, raising her voice to cover it. You were a priest serving the gods, how could you not know this? Of course, Rovi knew. Ishtar was the daughter of Anu, the most favored among the gods of Mesopotamia. But she had a sister very similar to herself, Ereshkigal, or simply Eresh. Yet despite being sisters, Eresh was completely different from Ishtar, who roamed freely between heaven and earth, indulging her whims without restraint. Ereshkigal was the ruler of the underworld, the place where souls rested after death. She remained in a cold, silent realm beneath the earth, forever gazing upward at the distant lights of the mortal world she desperately yearned for, yet could never reach due to her duties as goddess of the dead. Indeed, under normal circumstances, Ereshkigal could never interact with the world of the living. This had always been the case since ancient times. According to later mythology, and even according to Rovi's own previous experience as a priest, Ereshkigal was essentially a forgotten goddess, an abandoned deity rarely mentioned even among the divine pantheon. Even her closest relative, Ishtar, rarely spoke of her. Yet now, perhaps influenced by her host's humanity, Ishtar had carelessly mentioned her. This reminded Rovi. He still had a chance. Ishtar never spoke of Ereshkigal, not out of indifference or hatred, but precisely because she cared deeply. The stark contrast in their fates, despite being born from the same source, filled Ishtar with complicated emotions she preferred to bury deeply. They were sisters, after all. Born from the same origin, the same essence. She cared so deeply that she could never openly acknowledge her feelings, never tolerate outsiders speaking of them, let alone anyone insulting Ereshkigal. Rovi's lips curled into a smile. "What is it now? Why are you smiling like that?" "It's honestly kinda creepy," Ishtar said, feigning disgust, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her embarrassment. Could this guy really have fallen for me? The more she thought about it, the more nervous and hopeful she became. Yet beneath that anticipation, fear lingered. "I've finally realized why I've always paid so much attention to you," Rovi began smoothly. "Since when did you pay attention to me? All you've done is insult me every time we meet." Ishtar's eyes widened in shock. Then she heard Rovi let out a familiar, bone-chilling laugh. "Bwahahaha. Wait. Isn't that Gilgamesh's trademark laugh?" Ignoring Ishtar's internal screaming, Rovi's actions were actually simple to understand. He needed to clearly show the goddess his true feelings. Show her that it's your sister, Ereshkigal, whom I've always admired. Crack. Ishtar clenched her teeth so tightly it seemed something might break. Her scarlet eyes went wide with disbelief. Although his words were far from an outright confession of love, they were close enough but not directed at her. Instead, they were directed at her older sister. Ishtar would surely be angry now, right? Even if she wasn't angry, it didn't matter. Ishtar and Ereshkigal, being born from the same divine source, shared a mysterious spiritual resonance. Though this resonance might have faded with the decline of the Age of Gods, if Rovi remembered correctly, the recent event when he'd combined the Wedge of Heaven, Key of Heaven, and Chains of Heaven, shaking the foundations of the three realms, might have rekindled their connection. Speaking these words aloud to Ishtar might very well allow Ereshkigal to hear them too, and spark her curiosity. After all, throughout countless years, even when mortals did speak of the goddess of the underworld, it was only in fear or hatred. Never before had anyone praised her, let alone openly expressed admiration. And since Ereshkigal couldn't normally leave the underworld, the most likely outcome was that she would bring him down into her realm. Entering the underworld meant dying. For the goddess of death, taking life was simple even for someone wielding the Key of Heaven. Once there, he'd linger in the underworld long enough to ascend to the throne of heroes. And even if Eresh didn't respond in that way, it was still worth the attempt. Rovi hadn't expected guaranteed success. But if it did succeed, being the first mortal to confess to a goddess and then die because of it would be an unmatched historical achievement, wouldn't it? Besides, now he had another reason to journey to the underworld someday. Two birds with one stone. His plan was perfect. Rovi's smile grew even brighter. He repeated deliberately, "The one I truly admire is your sister." Those words echoed clearly through the shadowed alley, amidst the dying sunlight and falling red leaves. They echoed powerfully into Ishtar's ears, stunning the goddess of Venus. And also, deep beneath the earth, shaking the goddess of the underworld. What was that sound? From the deepest recesses of the underworld, Ereshkigal lifted her gaze toward the distant fissure above, staring into the faint, precious light that had recently appeared from the human realm. Through that crack came the sound. Soft, yet unmistakably clear. It stirred something within her heart. Chapter 25, Fate Ascend 25. 1172 words. At the deepest layer of the dark and desolate underworld, only cold stone remained. Flickering ghostly blue flames provided the sole illumination. These faint lights were the lingering warmth of departed souls, the only source of brightness in this shadowed realm. Within this dim glow, amidst a temple built from scattered stones and enveloped in desolation, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, raised her head from her throne. Beneath cascades of golden hair, a delicate expression of disbelief spread across her face. She could hardly believe it. The voice had reached her clearly, both its source and its words unmistakable. Someone from the mortal world said they admired her. Moreover, that voice, that presence, felt remarkably familiar to a goddess eternally confined to the silent darkness. "Is it you, the one who brought daylight back into my sight once more?" She closed her eyes gently, deep in thought. "Have you truly been admiring me?" For Ereshkigal, the word admiration was both familiar and utterly alien. Gods were admired constantly, for admiration itself was a form of worship. Gods basked in humanity's reverence, becoming symbols of faith through their splendor. But that was true only for ordinary gods. As the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal was shunned by her divine kin, feared and loathed by mortals as an incarnation of death itself. She was never worshipped, let alone admired. Yet now, someone claimed to admire her. And it was the very same person who, after countless years, had torn open a gap between the underworld and the mortal realm, allowing her to glimpse the faintest light of humanity once again. Who is he? Did he tear open this rift, just for her? She wanted to know. She wanted to see him, to behold his appearance, to gaze upon his face. She wished to visit the world of the living. An icy wind howled suddenly through the depths of the underworld. The goddess's figure remained upon her throne. But her spirit had already drifted upward, toward the mortal realm. "You." After a long silence, Ishtar's voice rang out once again in the narrow alley of Uruk. "Are you serious?" Time had flowed by unnoticed, the last rays of sunlight disappearing beneath the horizon, replaced by the vast darkness of the night sky, scattered with countless stars shimmering like rivers of silver. A pale moonbeam slipped quietly between buildings, illuminating Rovi's figure. Looking at Ishtar's conflicted face, shocked, angry, and complicated, he raised his lips into a slight smile. "Do I have any reason to deceive you? Don't underestimate me, goddess. I was a priest of Uruk's temple, after all." Indeed, at this moment, Ishtar was still unaware of Rovi's earlier act of defiance against the gods, his rebellion against those who sought to dictate his fate. From her perspective, he was merely a young priest, devotedly serving at the temple, unlikely to lie about something like this. Thus, "If you're going to strike, hurry up and do it. After all, I'm merely a mortal who openly mocks you, cares nothing for you, yet dares to admire your sister instead." Exploiting this information gap, Rovi spread his arms casually, presenting himself openly, ready for whatever might come. Yet all he received from Ishtar was a soft, weary sigh, as if her earlier shock and anger had been nothing but illusions. Rovi paused, somewhat stunned. Did it fail after all? He wasn't surprised. He'd already known that Ishtar, influenced deeply by Rin Tosaka's humanity, wouldn't kill him just for that. In Rovi's predictions, she would either erupt in fury or succumb to melancholy upon hearing his words. "She already heard you," Ishtar said mysteriously. Night air flowed gently, the moonlight like frost. As the goddess's words faded, Rovi watched in astonishment as her figure seemed to distort before his very eyes. It was as if two shadows had merged into one, similar yet distinctly different. "She heard your words. Deep down, she longs to see you," Ishtar whispered softly, her voice drifting on the night breeze. "But she's also afraid." The goddess's scarlet eyes were filled with complicated emotions. For her sister who dwelled eternally imprisoned at the bottom of the underworld, Ishtar had always felt sympathy. Yet as a daughter of the heavens, the mistress of Venus, she could never set foot in the underworld, just as her sister could never leave it. Beyond sympathy, she also felt a lingering fear toward Eresh. Yet now, for the first time, someone had openly proclaimed admiration for her sister, the goddess of death, whom others only feared and shunned. Something even Ishtar herself had never done. And he said it aloud. Resolutely and without hesitation, for all to hear. Perhaps it was due to these conflicting emotions that Ishtar once again rekindled the deep spiritual bond she once shared with Eresh, one long severed through the ages. She knew Eresh had heard Rovi's words. Eresh had felt moved. She wanted to see him for herself. Thus, Ishtar allowed a part of Uresh's consciousness to enter her body, just as she herself had descended by possessing her current host. Their shadows overlapped into one. And now, she's here, Ishtar murmured quietly, but she's afraid to meet you directly. She only wishes to see you. To see the only mortal who ever admired her. And then she will leave. The overlapping shadow gradually separated from Ishtar, forming a blurry, ethereal figure very similar to Ishtar herself, yet distinct. Although indistinct, Rovi could clearly see the golden hair cascading down and the same scarlet eyes. Eresh. Or rather, the goddess of the underworld. Ereshkigal. Like Ishtar, she had descended temporarily into this body through possession. Yet she did not fully manifest. Just as Ishtar had explained, Eresh merely wanted a brief glimpse, to witness the only mortal who had ever openly admired her. She feared if Rovi actually touched her presence, he would recoil in fear, utterly destroying that fragile admiration. Rovi wasn't quite sure how to describe this personality. Eresh was truly the polar opposite of her sister. But at that moment, the gentle breeze swirling around them suddenly grew icy cold, darkness thickening like a curtain, concealing the figure of the underworld's mistress and obscuring her into a faint, shadowy silhouette. The goddess of the underworld's arrival naturally brought the chill winds of death from her dark domain. They formed an impenetrable barrier, separating the living from the dead. A wall no mortal could cross. Except. Ereshkigal's appearance wasn't unexpected to Rovi. In fact, it was exactly what he wanted. Indeed, death representing the end of all things was terrifying, whether to mortals, objects, or even gods. But Rovi was different. He deeply yearned for death itself. How could he possibly let this opportunity slip away? He'd come this far. Could he really let her escape now? Rovi stepped forward resolutely, stretching out his hand to touch the frigid winds of the underworld. His heart raced in excitement. Right here, right now, this was the closest he'd come to death since the day he transmigrated into this world. Chapter 26, Fate Ascend 26. 1,115 words. Rovi didn't truly know what death felt like. After all, he'd never actually experienced it himself. Yet in this moment, he clearly sensed the presence of the netherworld itself. Cold, silent. But it wasn't frightening. Instead, it felt like a gentle hand brushing softly against his cheek, offering a quiet invitation to rest. Eternal sleep meant fading away. Granting rest to departed souls was what Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld, had done more than anything else. The netherworld's wind harmed mortal life precisely because it brought eternal peace. Though Rovi had fully become the key of heaven, granting him freedom to act under any circumstances and theoretically immunity to death, after his last setback he had thoroughly learned his lesson. At the very least, he now fully understood how to activate and deactivate his power. At this moment, he deliberately sealed his own abilities, allowing himself to touch the breath of eternal slumber. Yet this alone wouldn't suffice to grant Rovi genuine rest. For him, death was forever transient, a passing rather than a liberation. So the moment his palm touched the dark currents, Rovi steadied himself, continuing onward toward Eresh. His steps were resolute, eyes unwavering. Even as the netherworld's wind flayed his skin, decaying his youthful appearance until he seemed to age a century in mere moments. Turning instantly from a young man into a decrepit, dying old man. But, I told you already, my words weren't a joke. His intent was obvious. If you want to leave, fine. Just take me along with you. Please and thank you. Truly. I want to die. Rovi absolutely refused to miss this golden opportunity. Seeing his actions, witnessing his determination, Eresh, who had taken over Ishtar's body once she yielded control, was deeply shaken. Why is he going this far? Was he willing to face death itself, endure the netherworld's corrosion, and suppress his fear just to catch a glimpse of a goddess abandoned by all? The goddess of death covered her face, her heart thrown into turmoil. Had Rovi known her thoughts, he certainly would have replied bluntly, "No, you misunderstand, I'm just flattering you. You're actually not in my heart at all." But unfortunately, Rovi couldn't read the mind of the goddess of the underworld, nor could he discern Eresh's inner turmoil through layers of shadowy wind. Thus, Ereshkigal clearly misunderstood his intentions. Her heart grew more complicated. Yet she still believed she must not meet him directly. Through memories left behind in Ishtar's vessel, she had already discovered Rovi's identity. He was Uruk's youngest priest. He was the vizier to the king himself. Despite his youth, he held great influence in the mortal realm, having achieved immense success. He was nothing like her. Death was eternally solitary and ill-omened. Eresh would not allow him to lose everything because of her. What the goddess didn't know, however, was that Rovi was actually enjoying himself immensely. The netherworld's wind didn't bring him pain. The further he advanced, the more his mortal body felt enveloped by soothing drowsiness. He knew that if he continued forward, he would surely die before even reaching Eresh. A painless death. Wasn't that exactly what he'd always dreamed of? Such a rare opportunity. Rovi's steps quickened even more decisively, and Eresh's heart trembled further. Stop. Please stop now. Why are you pushing yourself this far? If Rovi halted, he would immediately cease being harmed by the netherworld's essence. In fact, he'd recover fully. Having only unconscious souls for companionship, surrounded solely by death, Ereshkigal had always been the gentlest toward life. Though untouched by humanity, she still treated every soul kindly, whether alive or dead. So she had never intended to harm Rovi. Nor had she expected him to go to such lengths for her sake. Alongside worry came heartfelt gratitude. Never had anyone done this for her. Never had anyone shown such disregard for death because of her. He's quite admirable, isn't he? A voice remarkably similar to her own whispered in Eresh's ear. It was Ishtar, hidden within her body, speaking softly. He's an idiot, sure, but this kind of courage is quite rare. Even the most devout believers rarely scorn death itself for their gods. He might genuinely like you. Ereshkigal. Of course, Eresh already understood this. Just by observing the young priest's actions, she sensed his apparent feelings. Avoidance now seemed futile. What should I do? How indecisive you are. And you call yourself the mistress of the underworld. Ishtar's scornful voice echoed inside her head, faintly tinged with envy. Summon the courage you had when you killed me, Ereshkigal. Indeed, Eresh had once killed Ishtar. It happened when Ishtar had entered the underworld, originally to comfort her sister who had just descended into the kingdom of the dead. But a misunderstanding led to an argument, causing Eresh, within her own domain, to strike down her sister. Though later revived by Anu, that incident still haunted Ishtar, making her avoid the netherworld entirely. Back then, Eresh had acted decisively. At that moment. Yes. Hadn't she always yearned for someone like this, a companion willing to remain by her side? So why was she retreating now? Suddenly, the goddess realized something crucial. Thank you, Ishtar. Chmph. It's nothing. Just consider this a small compensation for that misunderstanding back then. For a goddess like me, this much is nothing at all. As their inner voices resonated, Eresh slowly raised her head. Through the dark veil, scarlet eyes stared quietly at the man approaching her, growing steadily older, body increasingly frail, yet still resolute. Rovi also saw the crimson glow in the darkness. The eyes of the goddess. His body was already withered, practically unrecognizable in age, yet he was filled with delight. At last. Death awaits me. But suddenly, the darkness before him vanished, and the goddess hidden within revealed herself clearly. Golden hair cascaded softly, crimson cloak fluttering around her delicate form. Her long, pale legs supported a graceful figure, black fabric hugging the gentle curves of her hips, emphasizing her slender waist and soft curves. Sharing the same host, Eresh naturally looked identical to Ishtar, yet the aura she radiated was completely different. Deep, gentle. A quiet, reassuring girl whose presence promised tranquility. Yet tranquility was hardly what Rovi felt at the moment. He was utterly baffled. What are you doing? Why is my body recovering? Give me back the netherworld's deathly air. Why are you hugging me? Rovi stared blankly as Eresh suddenly embraced him. Softness enveloped him completely. The girl had opened her arms, wrapping herself around him as if embracing the entire world. In that instant, the girl symbolizing death finally found the courage to embrace the one who was utterly unafraid of it. TN, so closey. Chapter 27, Fate Ascend 27. 1,163 words. Another failure. Rovi didn't even need to think about it. Simply seeing the current situation before him was enough to make him realize this instantly. The breath of the netherworld had completely dissipated. His lost vitality had returned, fully restoring his youth, with no trace remaining of the frail, staggering old man he'd briefly become. Clearly, the goddess of the underworld had deliberately withdrawn her power. If Uresh had realized his true intentions, it was only natural, given her inherent kindness, that she would recall her deadly aura. But, what exactly was this situation now? Rovi's gaze slowly traveled down from the frosty, moonlit street to the figure currently nestled in his embrace. A dark golden crown was tilted slightly backward, golden hair spilling out beneath, softly brushing against his chin. He couldn't see her face clearly from this angle, but he could distinctly feel the gentle warmth of her cheek pressed firmly against his chest. Ereshkigal, goddess of the netherworld Uresh, was tightly embracing him. He had an impulse to pat her head and ask, "Girl, what exactly are you trying to do?" But he barely managed to hold back. It had ruined the moment completely. Rovi wasn't an idiot. Though this sudden development was somewhat difficult to fully understand, he realized that his confusion stemmed only from lacking the same experiences as Uresh. He could at least grasp why her feelings had shifted. Once again, I've seriously overdone my performance. Rovi inwardly sighed, pressing his fingers to his forehead. But there was no point agonizing over it. He would just have to keep trying. At that very moment, as the gentle night breeze carried soft whispers through the alleyway, Rovi heard the faintest voice from within his arms. "Thank you," she murmured quietly, her head still lowered. "For letting me know there's someone who still remembers me, who still admires a useless goddess like myself." The warmth radiating from her face against his chest betrayed her nervous embarrassment. Rovi had never been a saint. Though forming such a bond with the goddess wasn't his original purpose, he certainly wouldn't reject a beautiful relationship with her if it were possible. Ties to a deity would serve not only as proof toward his eventual ascent to the throne of heroes, but also as evidence of his humanity. Toward a gentle, kind-hearted goddess like Ereshkigal, he couldn't deny holding some genuine affection. It was unexpected, yet perhaps not unwelcome. "You really are useless," Rovi remarked lightly, causing Uresh, who was still shyly looking down, to startle and lift her head instinctively. She found herself staring directly into a handsome young face, into eyes filled with gentle amusement. "I mean, really, what kind of goddess is too scared to even respond to her admirers' feelings?" Rovi teased warmly. What? I was just afraid you couldn't handle it." "That's right, exactly that." Uresh opened her mouth hastily, clumsily defending herself. But as she continued, her confidence, or rather, her justification, seemed to return bit by bit. "I'm the cruel goddess who represents death itself. How could a mere human dare confront me directly?" Rovi thoughtfully stroked his chin. Would the cruel goddess of death perhaps cry like a little girl? Hey! Uresh panicked instantly, stumbling back 2 steps and hurriedly rubbing her eyes. There were no tears at all. You tricked me. How could you?" Uresh flushed bright red in embarrassment. The goddess of the underworld didn't even have tears in the first place. He completely fooled me. Had she been Ishtar, she'd already be yelling at him furiously by now. Despite sharing the same face, their reactions were entirely different. Rovi shrugged casually, spreading his hands. "I didn't lie, though. Look, aren't these tears right here?" In his open palm, a small crystalline sparkle gently glowed, shimmering softly even in the darkness. Uresh froze in astonishment. At first glance, it truly looked like a tear. But as she carefully took it from Rovi's palm, she finally realized it was a tiny key sealed inside a crystal-clear fragment resembling ice. A key capable of opening the doors to the mortal world. "No matter what came before, from now on, you'll hold a tier of the mortal realm," Rovi explained calmly. Uresh stared blankly, unsure how to respond. Had he specially prepared this for her? The goddess of the netherworld gently clasped the crystal key tightly in her palm and nodded solemnly. Seeing her acceptance, Rovi relaxed inwardly. This was a key he'd deliberately crafted using his abilities as the key of heaven. It could open doorways wherever its owner wished. And more importantly, it worked both ways. Uresh could use it to attempt leaving the underworld. Similarly, whenever Uresh was in her domain, Rovi could also enter freely. Another perfect avenue toward death had just opened for him. Truly, I'm a genius, Rovi silently congratulated himself. I gratefully accept your gift, Rovi. A gentle blush returned to the goddess's cheeks as she stroked the crystal's smooth surface, her delicate lips curling into a beautiful smile. And I have something for you as well. In the name of a goddess, I grant you my blessing that henceforth, death and the netherworld shall never harm you again. A blessing I've never before bestowed upon anyone, Rovi. Then what's the point of me going to the underworld at all? He was about to refuse outright when Uresh suddenly approached him again. The golden-haired girl gently raised herself onto her tiptoes, fragrant air brushing softly against his face, as her delicate, jade-like fingertip pressed gently against his lips. And then, tender red lips followed suit, softly kissing her own finger against his mouth. Rovi's eyes widened in surprise, her face now mere inches away, the goddess's pale cheeks flushed captivatingly. A blessing that protected against death wasn't ordinary at all. Rather, it was the goddess of the underworld's most heartfelt vow, proof of her genuine affection toward the one she blessed. Will you remember this moment? Uresh silently asked herself, eyes closed. For her, this was an unprecedented joy since the moment of her existence. But no, she wouldn't simply remember this moment. Because of the key in her hand, because of him, she'd treasure every moment from now onward. Her lips gently curled into a sweet smile. The goddess of death smiled beautifully, like a flower that had never before blossomed in the netherworld. She completely fell for him already. Deep within her host body, Ishtar quietly sighed. Not that she couldn't understand, had Ishtar herself been imprisoned in darkness, utterly alone for countless years, and someone suddenly risked their life to stay with her, she certainly wouldn't have reacted any better than Uresh had. But still, when she thought about it carefully, why do I suddenly feel so sour about it? Ishtar's teeth ached. Her very presence felt painfully out of place now. She had somehow become a giant third wheel. Unfortunately, Rovi couldn't hear Ishtar's lamentation. Nor could he possibly say to a goddess who currently had no physical form, "You came at just the right time." Chapter 28, Fate Ascend 28. 1137 words. The finger-separated kiss was both long and fleeting, like a dragonfly skimming over water. When Rovi finally regained his senses, the girl before him had already disappeared. In her place stood the proud and haughty goddess of Venus once again. You sure got lucky. Having retreated several meters away, Ishtar crossed her arms, baring her teeth aggressively. She looked fierce, but the lingering flush on her cheeks betrayed the turmoil within her. Of course, she couldn't remain calm. After all, she and Uresh shared the same body. Once Uresh's consciousness had returned to the underworld, Ishtar, regaining control, naturally felt the lingering effects of the netherworld goddess's emotions. Next time, the more intensely she felt it, the more unsettled Ishtar grew. Next time, I'll definitely make you see the beauty of this goddess clearly. You'd better wash your neck and wait. Leaving behind these bold words, Ishtar vanished abruptly, as if fleeing the scene. She needed to calm her racing heart and the strange feelings it stirred within her. Uresh had already fallen completely. Ishtar definitely wouldn't allow herself to follow suit. It would be truly, unbearably embarrassing. Still, she couldn't resist leaving one last taunt behind. Rovi stood motionlessly, gazing quietly at the now empty alley. He lightly touched his lips, as if the fleeting sensation still lingered. The night gradually gave way to dawn, a distant ray of morning sunlight piercing the darkness. Shaking his head slightly, he realized he'd experienced yet another unexpected night. But it wasn't bad at all. Though the netherworld goddess's blessing did present a minor problem for Rovi, nothing in the world was truly immortal. History was full of heroes with supposed immortality who'd ultimately perished. He could even try using the key of heaven's power to toggle the blessing's effects on and off, turning this passive state into an active skill. Thus, Rovi's mood was still rather good. Well, Ian's probably waiting. I should head back now. With this thought, Rovi took a few steps forward, glanced behind him briefly, then strode away from the alley for good. Ha ha ha. Truly worthy of being a talent personally chosen by this wise and mighty king. Before Rovi had even stepped into his residence, still standing just outside the gate, he heard loud, unrestrained laughter echoing from within the courtyard. To think that even the goddess of the netherworld couldn't resist your charms. Rovi glanced around worriedly, wondering if the neighbors would be disturbed. Fortunately, this neighborhood housed Uruk's elite. Their residences were large, with excellent soundproofing, and even if disturbed, none would dare complain. He walked along the flat stone path and pushed open the gate. Bright morning sunlight filled the spacious courtyard, lush greenery framing every corner. On top of the roof stood a shining golden figure, shouting triumphantly down at him. Rovi pressed a hand to his forehead, then glanced aside toward the doorway, meeting eyes with the figure emerging from inside. Rovi, you're back. Ian cheerfully hopped toward him, emerald green hair swaying gently in the breeze, pure white robes floating softly like clouds. Barefoot, Enkidu gracefully stepped across the lush grass. Rovi fondly rubbed Enkidu's head, then pointed upward toward the person on the roof. When did that guy get here? Just recently. Ian tilted his head slightly. Then he climbed onto the roof and started yelling nonsense. He's annoying, but he seems rather amusing, too. It appeared Enkidu still held a grudge over Gilgamesh's earlier hostility. Since Rovi had interrupted their original battle, Gilgamesh and Enkidu hadn't truly recognized each other's worth. Right now, the only thing linking the wedge and the lock was Rovi, the key. You damned mongrel, dare ignore the mighty king? Seeing Rovi pay him no heed, Gilgamesh instantly grew irritated. He leaped down from several meters above, landing firmly upon the grass. Rovi spared him a glance. I've no interest in entertaining a lunatic who's lost his mind this early in the morning. Indeed, a wild dog will always remain a wild dog, no matter how carefully one tries to domesticate it, Gilgamesh scoffed coldly. True enough. For instance, you never seem able to speak in ways that ordinary humans can understand, Rovi retorted meaningfully. Glancing again at Gilgamesh shirtless, adorned only in his golden skirt-like armor, he asked, Did you visit Sidui? She is, after all, this king's most loyal tool. If she truly collapsed, it would inconvenience me greatly. Gilgamesh responded dismissively. Keep up that Sunda act. Rovi clapped his hands sarcastically, leading Enkidu toward the doorway. Gilgamesh followed closely behind. Though influenced by the Age of Gods, the furniture of this era remained quite simple, nothing beyond basic tables and chairs. Rovi filled a bowl from a large water jar and offered it to Gilgamesh. Forgive my poor hospitality, but I figure this should suffice for you to rinse out that terribly foul mouth of yours this early morning, Rovi said dryly. Gilgamesh didn't refuse, casually accepting the bowl. In consideration of your entertaining performance earlier, I'll forgive your insolence just this once. Gilgamesh sat comfortably upon a stone chair, then burst into laughter again, his scarlet eyes narrowing in amusement. He studied Rovi closely, as well as the delicate, girl-like Enkidu standing obediently nearby. His lips curled into a particularly mischievous smirk. Though he hadn't been physically present earlier, this time, with both in the same city, Gilgamesh, who possessed the highest class of clairvoyance, had caught vague glimpses of Rovi's encounter. Even if blurred, the scenes were clear enough to view without resorting to future sight. Putting aside Enkidu, who wielded power equal to his own. That even the netherworld goddess had been charmed. Tell me, how exactly did you accomplish it? Rovi, who had just taken a seat across from Gilgamesh, raised an eyebrow at the question. Casually swirling the water in his bowl, the golden-haired king continued, teasing Ishtar was one thing, but how did you make the goddess of the underworld fall so hopelessly for you? Even bestowing upon you a blessing that such a goddess can only grant once. Goddess of the underworld. Fallen hopelessly? For some reason, Rovi felt Enkidu's gaze beside him suddenly shift subtly. Rovi, En tilted his head innocently, emerald green eyes sparkling with curiosity as he smiled sweetly. Who's this goddess of the underworld? Rovi. Why am I suddenly getting this weird sense of déjà vu? Gilgamesh had to have done this intentionally. Rovi shot the king a sideways glare. Gilgamesh, however, was laughing gleefully. Indeed, this king absolutely did it intentionally. Did you honestly think this king would always let a mongrel like you snap at me? Now was his moment to counterattack. Foolish mongrel. Gilgamesh spat these two words, then laughed even louder in absolute triumph. From his smug expression and boisterous laughter, he truly looked like an overly excited husky, just shy of rolling on the floor and prancing about in pure, shameless delight. Chapter 29, Fate Ascend 29. 1157 words. Who's this goddess of the underworld? And who's the goddess of Venus? In a room within a quiet courtyard beside Uruk's royal palace, rays of sunlight spilled through the window panes, highlighting specks of floating dust like glowing embers. Enkidu, seated beside Rovi, stared at him accusingly. Rovi, did you secretly go fight the gods without telling us? The divine construct in the form of a girl tilted her delicate face upward, her voice clear yet tinged with displeasure. Well, but why does it sound so natural when a divine construct like you talks about fighting gods? Rovi was momentarily at a loss. Of course, he knew that despite being a divine construct herself, Enkidu held no reverence toward the gods because she hadn't first encountered the devoted holy maiden who worshipped them. Instead, she had met Rovi, who openly challenged the gods. To her, the gods were simply enemies. For Enkidu, who was innocent and straightforward, things were quite simple. It was nothing much, just meeting some new friends. Rovi carefully chose his words. There was no reason to hide it. After all, En was practically raised by him, their relationship akin to siblings. She was simply worried about his safety. Nothing more. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh immediately ruined the moment. Ha ha ha, new friends. Your relationship with these new friends seems rather intimate, huh? So intimate you were practically kissing mouth to mouth. Though he could only vaguely infer events from his clairvoyance, Gilgamesh had clearly seen two blurry figures very close together. So, a king is basically just a glorified peeping thief now? A vein twitched visibly on Rovi's forehead. Peeping? Ridiculous. Gilgamesh scoffed arrogantly. This king rules over all things under heaven, this world is merely my backyard. Do I need permission to oversee my own property? Yet, unfortunately for him, Rovi's single retort instantly silenced the king. So is that why you shamelessly declared you'd take the first night of every citizen of Uruk? That incident really had happened. Shortly after reaching adulthood, Gilgamesh transitioned abruptly from a pious child who worshipped the gods to a rebellious youth who realized the gods saw him merely as a pawn. To express his rebellion, he rapidly transformed from a wise ruler into a notorious tyrant, his first outrageous decree being to claim first night rights. Naturally, it failed miserably. Gilgamesh quickly realized a critical oversight. Uruk was a grand city-state surrounded by countless towns and villages, with a population of hundreds of thousands. Even just counting young people, the number was enormous. Forget being a demigod, no ironclad kidneys could handle such a task. Barely 2 days later, the absurd decree was quietly rescinded, buried in shame as a dark chapter in his past. Now, Rovi had ruthlessly dug it up. Mongrel. Gilgamesh finally snapped, unable to hold back. Who's the mongrel calling? The mongrel is calling you. Oh, greetings, Mongrel-san. Seeing Gilgamesh instantly fall for the oldest trick in the book, Rovi couldn't help but smirk. Old tricks truly are the best. Bwahahaha. Rovi laughed aloud mockingly. This damned mongrel dares imitate even my royal laughter. Gilgamesh's eyes widened in disbelief. Somehow, Enkidu, having gone from interrogating to simply watching, glanced back and forth between Rovi and Gilgamesh, tilting her head curiously. Her delicate face reflected a thoughtful look. This was completely different from the quiet life she had experienced in the forest. A little noisy, perhaps. But it wasn't bad at all. Her earlier dissatisfaction with Gilgamesh quietly faded. En smiled gently, shifting her small figure to lean lightly against Rovi. Sunlight continued to fill the courtyard outside. It was truly a pleasant day. The king quarreled with the sage that day. The divine construct silently listened to the whispers of wind and humanity. Thus, beneath the radiant sunlight, the three primordial beings officially met. Yet soon after, calamity would follow close behind. Epic of Gilgamesh. Suddenly, bang! What was that? A loud noise from outside interrupted the two's bickering, prompting all three in the room to glance sharply toward the doorway. Enkidu quickly straightened, emerald green hair rising softly without a sound. Outside, the source of the noise swiftly rose from the ground. Pale arms gleamed brilliantly under the sunlight, dazzling to behold, though most of her captivating figure was now covered by a flowing red cloak that modestly fell past her thighs. This attire was closer to the style of the netherworld goddess, perhaps intentionally chosen in hopes of further catching Rovi's attention. Ishtar! Rovi and Gilgamesh simultaneously froze. Enkidu's expression turned slightly wary, her gaze cooling considerably. There was no doubt the figure standing there was Ishtar, the goddess of Venus, whom Rovi had parted with just recently. Cough, cough. Ignoring the trio's surprised reactions, Ishtar quickly composed herself and stood proudly before the doorway. Crossing her arms, backlit by the sun, she declared loudly, Gilgamesh, Rovi, and you, divine construct. I, the mistress of heaven, Ishtar, hereby formally declare war upon you. My true self in heaven has requested permission from Lord Anu to unleash the strongest divine beast, the Bull of Heaven, and the mightiest monster Humbaba, to punish you sinners who defy the god. Tremble and fear, mortals. This is purely a warning, no, it's a declaration of war. Absolutely not a helpful reminder or anything. Don't misunderstand me. Well, that's definitely a tip-off, Rovi thought wryly. Clearly, Ishtar, influenced by human emotions, had come specifically to warn them, even if her method was hilariously indirect. But it suited her perfectly. After all, the part of Ishtar influenced by humanity now carried Rin-Tosaka's stubborn traits. If the gods truly unleashed such disasters, this Ishtarin likely couldn't remain calm herself. Humans and gods truly were different creatures. In the heavens. Above the human realm, in a dimension parallel yet unreachable by mortal hands. Inside the radiant hall of the gods, deities gathered to deliberate. Everyone has heard Goddess Ishtar's proposal. Sitting atop the throne at the head of the hall was the sky god, Anu, crowned and gripping the divine scepter. He swept his eagle-like eyes around the assembled gods seated on their thrones. Since she has willingly offered the Bull of Heaven under her authority, then I, sky god Anu, shall make this declaration. We, the gods, shall deliver the harshest punishment upon those who defy us. I shall simultaneously unleash the mightiest divine beast, the Bull of Heaven, and the most fearsome monster, Humbaba. Gugalana, the Bull of Heaven, the very vortex of storms, the embodiment of drought, he shall trample every inch of land, bringing ruin wherever he tread. Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, manifestation of the eternal grievances of the earth's countless souls, the incarnation of death itself, he shall grant everlasting sleep to all living creature. With Anu's powerful chant, two beams of light, one black, one white, descended simultaneously from the heavens into the mortal realm. One from the east, one from the west. Both swiftly converged upon Uruk. Tn. Jilly was so scared of Humbaba. Chapter 30, Fate Ascend 30. 1,243 words. Due to the White Titan's descent 7,000 years ago, piercing through the very foundations of the gods' presence on earth, the age of gods had steadily declined. Though the gods still dwelled in heaven, they had long since lost the ability to manifest their true forms in the mortal realm. Yet even diminished, the age of gods had not fully ended. Just as Ishtar could descend by possessing a human body, other gods, though rarely finding suitable vessels, or at best briefly inhabiting bodies like Aruru, still retained various ways to meddle in human affairs. Their previous use of the eye was one such method. Now, unleashing the greatest divine beast and the mightiest monster upon the world was another. A bunch of mongrels who can only skulk in the shadows, employing cowardly tactic. After hearing Ishtar's warning, Gilgamesh sneered disdainfully. If you have guts, come down and face this king yourselves. Ishtar. If they could come down themselves, they'd have done it long ago, you know? That's why I said, I'm just here to warn. Wait, why are you restraining me? Ishtar shifted her gaze from Gilgamesh to Rovi and Enkidu, both clad in simple linen robes opposite her. Specifically, she stared at Rovi. The goddess squirmed, causing the chains binding her body to jingle crisply. She had been captured. Bound head to toe by the chains of heaven, she could barely move, only her head peeking out amidst long, black hair. Despite coming purely to deliver a warning or, in her words, declare war, she was immediately bound by Enkidu's chains of heaven and dragged inside like a prize catch. Had Ishtar possessed her original divine form, Enkidu, who had yet to fully master the chains, couldn't possibly restrain her. But unfortunately, she was merely a spirit possession, thus, helplessly dragged inside. Dragged in like a captured pig. If I'd known this would happen, I wouldn't have bothered coming. No good deed goes unpunished. Let her go. Rovi glanced at Enkidu beside him. She means no harm. Right, Ishtar? Come to think of it, this king did find it peculiar earlier. Gilgamesh interjected at once, inspecting the goddess up and down with his scarlet, serpent-like eyes. He then smirked widely. Turns out you've been overtaken by the human personality of your vessel. Ha ha ha. Is this truly the so-called goddess? Pathetic enough to amuse even this king, Ishtar's face instantly flushed crimson, yet she couldn't muster a rebuttal. But Gilgamesh unexpectedly paused. Admittedly, your current self is far more pleasing to the eye than that obnoxiously arrogant goddess. Clatter. At that moment, Enkidu obediently retracted the chains of heaven at Rovi's request. Ishtar collapsed onto the ground, her crimson coat folding around her gracefully, revealing slender legs curled awkwardly beneath her. Drawing in a deep breath, she lifted her scarlet eyes, but before she could relax, she met a pair of clear, emerald-green eyes staring coldly back at her. You carry an unpleasant scent. Enkidu, seated beside Rovi, smiled gently yet chillingly. A little scary. Ishtar shrank back involuntarily. But there's another scent on you that isn't so bad. Enkidu withdrew her gaze, calmly continuing, as long as that scent remains dominant, I won't harm you. Though seemingly reassuring, why did those words feel even more unsettling? The divine construct named Enkidu always spoke bluntly about what she disliked, without hesitation or mercy. So now, can we talk clearly? Rovi interrupted, dissipating the oppressive atmosphere surrounding Ishtar. Mistress of Heaven, what exactly did you mean earlier? Exactly what I said. Ishtar exhaled sharply, regaining her composure. She glanced toward Rovi, Enkidu, and then Gilgamesh, but quickly shook her head. No, wait, I'm clearly here just to declare war. Why should I tell you so much? She even shot a glare at Rovi. She'd specially changed into attire reminiscent of Uresh's style, hoping to impress him, but this guy hadn't reacted at all, even allowing the chains to wrap her up, utterly infuriating. Suddenly, gold coins clattered to the floor. Rovi withdrew his hand, watching as the treasure from Gilgamesh's gate of Babylon scattered at Ishtar's feet. Now, care to explain clearly? If Rovi recalled correctly, Ishtar's human vessel, Rin-Tosaka, was famously greedy for money. Naturally, Ishtar, influenced by Rin, shared that greed. Sure enough, Ishtar's eyes lit up, hands instinctively sweeping all the coins into her lap. Catching Rovi's smug, knowing expression, the goddess blushed faintly, forcibly sitting up straight. Her explanation sounded extremely unconvincing. Don't misunderstand. I wouldn't be tempted by mere coins. This is purely the mercy of a goddess, not wanting you to perish without knowing why. Finally, Ishtar took another glance at the three people before continuing. Earlier, you openly defied the gods, didn't you? Now, at the suggestion of my true form, the gods have decided to punish you, or rather, the entirety of Uruk. So they've dispatched the strongest divine beast and the strongest monster simultaneously? Rovi interrupted excitedly. Yes. Ishtar nodded, puzzled by Rovi's sudden enthusiasm. Of course he was excited. In the original epic of Gilgamesh, Both Humbaba and the Ball of Heaven were formidable foes that Gilgamesh and Enkidu barely defeated together. Especially Humbaba, before Enkidu became human, as a being of clay, she'd lived alongside Humbaba for some time, even learning much of her combat instincts from it. But now, thanks to the butterfly effect Rovi himself had caused, both appeared simultaneously. A catastrophe for others, but for Rovi, the perfect opportunity. Under such an overwhelming crisis, surely survival would be difficult even if he fought with all his might. But obviously, he couldn't say that openly. Taking a deep breath, he feigned worry. Seems the gods have firmly resolved to eliminate us. Indeed, the simultaneous appearance of Mesopotamia's mightiest divine beast and monster spelled unprecedented disaster. Representing natural calamities, even among gods, few could match their raw power. Not just now, even in the future, when Gilgamesh and Enkidu fully mastered their powers, handling even one of them was already difficult enough. Anu declared clearly, Ishtar continued, faithfully acting as an informer, of the key of heaven, wedge of heaven, and lock of heaven only two may remain. The gods had learned from their previous encounter that these three individuals together had the potential to shake the foundations of the three realms, posing an enormous threat. Thus, only two could remain. Then let me go negotiate with the gods. Rovi immediately seized the chance to propose sacrificing himself, preserving Gilgamesh and Enkidu's legacy. To be remembered in epic poetry as a tragic hero. Exactly what he wanted. But before he finished, Gilgamesh interrupted harshly. A pack of mongrels dares dictate affairs within this king's garden? Return and tell your gods, wash their necks and await this king's blade. Gilgamesh swept his arm out imperiously. We three will one day drag every last god down into the mortal realm. Okay, but could you at least let me finish? Rovi sighed inwardly, his speech completely derailed. But noticing Ishtar's shocked expression and feeling Enkidu's determined gaze behind him, Rovi paused briefly, then smiled faintly. Fine. This way works too. If war broke out, surely dying wouldn't be hard at all. Then, let it be this way. Rovi turned to Ishtar, or rather, directed his voice toward the gods themselves. Those who wish to die, come. His voice echoed powerfully through the room, reverberating to the heavens. Yet in the end, he whispered softly, words only he could hear. But please, don't hesitate to crush me just because I'm such a delicate flower. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.